Lord of Mysteries, the Fool Brother is a Witch. By Tuo Zhang de Yi Zhe. Chapter 51-75. Chapter 51 Dinner. Oh, you. Hee hee, Eve urged, pushing Klein's back. Let's go, let's go. If we delay any longer, the sun will be out. Klein let Eve push him. The two of them wandered around the dock and the market, buying some seafood and vegetables before heading back. All right, Eve pulled Klein into an empty alley, placing a hand on his shoulder. Let's go back. Klein once again saw the oil painting world. After the world returned to normal, they were already back at Eve's house. Klein placed the bags he was holding on the table, turned on the gas lamp, found a basin in the kitchen, and put the fish into it. This one, Eve said, pointing to a black fish, this one looks more normal. You know it's not normal too. Klein grumbled in his heart, feeling a pang of sympathy. Do we really have to give it to Rui Rui? We can also give it to Mingrui, Eve immediately replied. Then it's still Rui Rui, Klein immediately corrected himself, saying, sorry, Rui Rui, better a dead Taoist than a dead poor Taoist. Relax, Eve waved her hand dismissively, would I really let you eat random things? I've already divined it, there's no harm, at most, it might be psychologically or tastefully difficult to accept. Eve tapped her index finger on her chin, tilted her head slightly, and said, if eaten raw or boiled in plain water, the taste shouldn't be strange, it's just a normal fruity flavor. Wait, I suddenly thought of a question. Eve's face was serious, her eyes grave, and she murmured in a tone as earnest as if discussing an academic problem, as the blood of these fish fruit juice. Klein broke into a sweat. If you want, I can pour you a glass to taste when I clean the fish later. Okay, Eve nodded and said. I was just saying that casually. Klein immediately said, you're not going to give it to Rui Rui again, are you? Yes, Eve said, hands on her hips, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Rui Rui is a vampire cat, it's a good chance for her to try something new. Klein was momentarily speechless. Eve put the other fish into the mirror world to prevent Rui Rui from finding them, then patted Klein's shoulder and said, do a good job. Don't add chili to the fish, Rui Rui can't eat spicy food. Klein took off his jacket, tied on Eve's white lace cat head apron, rolled up his sleeves, and began to work in the kitchen, while Eve returned to the living room. He first cooked rice. After eating bread for several days, he still missed rice very much. After the rice was steamed, Klein looked at the fish in the basin and thought for 2 seconds. He decided to make plain boiled fish. If he followed normal processing methods, a fruit fish would be like cooking fruit using fish cooking methods, and Klein couldn't imagine that taste. He picked up the knife, just about to start, when Eve suddenly appeared at the door. Klein paused, holding the knife, and looked at her. Eve glanced at Klein, chuckled twice, and then retreated. Klein looked outside the door, then at the fish in the basin, hesitated for a moment, and decided to continue making boiled fish. He took a glass from the cupboard to use as a container for the blood. After cleaning the scales and internal organs, he put the fish directly into a pot to boil with water. He didn't know how long this fish needed to be cooked, so Klein calculated it based on the time for a regular fish. The fish was relatively small, so he cooked it over low heat. After about 15 minutes, Klein served the fish onto a plate. He picked up the plate and sniffed it. A strong fishy smell was mixed with a hint of fruity fragrance. If it were a human, they definitely wouldn't be able to stand it, but Rui Rui was a cat. Klein carried the plate into the living room and saw Eve sitting at the dining table, holding a cloth doll. Under the light, Eve held a needle and thread in one hand, stitching the doll stitch by stitch, appearing to have a hint of maternal affection and tenderness. He placed the fish on the table and leaned in for a closer look. The doll was very crude, with only a rough human shape. Its 2 eyes were one large and one small, and their shapes were also very irregular, but one could tell that she probably intended to sew the eyes into a round shape. The doll had no eyebrows, and the part Eve was sewing, judging by its position, should be the mouth. Glancing at the misaligned eyes, Klein added another thought in his mind, it could also be a nose positioned too low. Klein withdrew his gaze, pretended not to have seen it, and silently returned to the kitchen. They hadn't bought many vegetables, and Klein didn't know how to cook many dishes. After making a few more home-style dishes, Klein untied his apron and put it back. Is it ready? Eve looked up at Klein, who was untying his apron, and threw the doll back into the mirror world. I'll go get Rui Rui. As soon as she finished speaking, Eve's figure disappeared from the room. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. In less than a minute, Eve reappeared in the room, holding Rui Rui. Time for dinner. Eve placed Rui Rui on the dining table, ruffled her small head, and pushed the fruit fish in front of her. Hurry and try your brother's cooking. Why is it so bland? Rui Rui said, but still leaned down and took a bite. Her round cat eyes instantly widened. This fish. Surprised. Unexpected. Eve asked with a smile, there's even fruit-flavored blood, want to try some? I think I'd rather just drink fruit juice directly, Rui Rui commented seriously, the taste is mediocre, the fishy smell is stronger than the fruity taste. Your reaction is so flat, Eve said disappointedly, tilting her head, I should have made it myself. Rui Rui rolled her eyes at Eve and said to Klein, thank you. Klein chuckled softly and said, you're welcome. Eve glanced at Klein, then at Rui Rui, sat up straight, and said, let's eat, let's eat. Klein picked up his chopsticks. Although he had already eaten dinner, he could still eat some after working for so long. Moreover, facing his own labor and Chinese food he hadn't seen for a long time, even if he couldn't eat much, he still wanted to taste a couple of bites. After dinner, Eve was responsible for washing the dishes. Klein helped her clear the table and asked, where did you buy these chopsticks? Klein looked at the smoothly polished wooden chopsticks, which didn't seem like something Eve could make. Intis, Eve glanced at Klein and then added with a smile, Rosel's era. Klein's hand, holding the chopsticks, trembled. He had just eaten with an antique from over 100 years ago. This is probably the most extravagant I'll ever be in my life, Klein thought silently. Wait. Klein looked at the chairs, table, and vase next to him. He didn't dare to move, in case he broke some antique, selling him wouldn't be enough to compensate. Eve chuckled lightly, I'm just kidding. I had these specially made a year ago. The only things in this house that could be called antiques are us. Eve pointed to herself and Rui Rui on the sofa. Klein breathed a sigh of relief, his whole body relaxing. I'll send you back first. Eve put the dishes back on the sink, then turned to Klein and said, you should rest too. Don't forget the Tarot Club tomorrow afternoon. Chapter 52, The Tarot Club. Klein woke up past 11, having slept very late the previous night. He sat on the bed and stretched, sighing contentedly at how good it felt to wake up naturally. Although Klein often had to stay at Blackthorn Security Company due to the Welch and Black Cat cases, the Nighthawks had not deprived him of his rightful vacation. His weekly day off had not been cancelled. Because of the gathering, Klein had scheduled his day off for Monday. Klein pushed open the door and entered the living room. It was empty. He was the only one home now. Melissa and Benson had left long ago, but they had left breakfast for Klein in the kitchen. After a leisurely breakfast, Klein took a public carriage to the club for target practice, finishing his 30 bullets for the day. Klein wiped away sweat, picked up his coat, and checked his pocket watch. It wasn't even 1 o'clock, so he took a stroll around the city, hoping to recall some information about the notebook. He had also asked Eve about the notebook's whereabouts, and Eve's reply was, be independent, be independent. Don't bother old sister with such small matters. Is there a possibility that this isn't a small matter for them? Klein felt exhausted, because he also didn't know if it was a big deal or a small one. But Captain and the others had been looking for the notebook, and the Hermetic Order was also looking for it, so it probably wasn't a small matter. His stroll yielded no results. Klein's missing memories were still nowhere to be found. He wasn't disappointed, as this wasn't the first or second time. Klein pulled out his pocket watch to check the time. 2:27 p.m. Snap. He closed the pocket watch and put it back in his coat pocket. It was almost time for the meeting, he should hurry back. Klein bought a newspaper on a whim and took a public carriage home. Back home, he sat at the table and looked at the notebook for a while, actually reviewing the knowledge Eve had taught him, to prevent the tragic discovery of having forgotten it when he needed it at the gathering. After reviewing all the knowledge in his mind, Klein took the newspaper and went into the washroom. Who knew if any Nighthawks were secretly following him? Caution was key to navigating the world safely. Inside the washroom, Klein placed the newspaper on the toilet, walked 4 steps counterclockwise, and silently chanted in his heart. Immortal Venerable who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Heavenly Lord who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. God who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. The familiar murmurs echoed in his ears again. After several times entering and exiting Saphira Castle, Klein had developed some resistance to these murmurs. At least, they no longer caused him excruciating pain as they once did. When the murmurs faded, Klein's figure appeared in the magnificent, giant-like palace. He sat on a bronze chair and pulled out his pocket watch to check the time. 2 minutes left. Klein's fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, his brown eyes fixed on the ticking second hand. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Why isn't old sister here yet? She wouldn't forget. She's here. Before Klein could finish his thought, he felt Eve's knock on the door, and immediately sat up straight, opening the door for Eve. I thought you'd forgotten. Klein breathed a sigh of relief inwardly. How could I? Eve leaned lazily against the back of the chair. I'm used to arriving just in time. Klein gave Eve a speechless look before returning his gaze to his pocket watch. The second hand moved inch by inch, completing another full circle under Klein's watchful eye. Klein closed his pocket watch with a snap, put it away, and touched the 2 crimson stars with each hand. Crimson light gushed out like a spring, then slowly faded, and 2 more figures appeared in the magnificent palace. Both noticed Eve's presence immediately. Alger frowned, a hint of dissatisfaction flashing in his eyes, but it instantly returned to normal. Such an existence probably wouldn't care about our thoughts, Alger thought self-deprecatingly, feeling helpless and unwilling. Audrey, on the other hand, seemed very happy, delighted by the growth and expansion of the Tarot Club. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Audrey rose and greeted Klein cheerfully, her tone carrying a hint of barely concealed anticipation and excitement. The Hanged Man also followed Audrey in offering his greetings. Eve looked at Audrey, then at Alger, and curved her lips into a slight smile, letting out a soft chuckle. Klein had been secretly observing Eve, and that smile nearly made his heart stop. He prayed frantically in his mind. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with me. But Eve couldn't hear Klein's prayers. She stood up, lifted her skirt, and said respectfully and devoutly, "Good afternoon, great Mr. Fool." Alger watched Eve's greeting, a trace of thought flashing in his eyes. His mind raced. From the Empress's attitude, she must know the Fool, possibly a member of the power behind the Fool. Her attitude is very respectful, so the Fool's status in the organization must be very high. Klein nodded stiffly in response, saying in a deep voice, "This is the Empress." Help. So awkward. Klein felt so awkward he wanted to dig his toes into the ground, not daring to look at Eve, wishing he could travel back in time and slap himself for inviting Eve. Audrey smiled at Eve and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Empress, I am Justice." Alger also nodded to Eve and said, "Good afternoon, I am the Hanged Man." Eve secretly glanced at Klein, who was hidden behind the gray fog, then chuckled and said, "Good afternoon, Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man." After the greetings, Audrey asked with anticipation in her eyes, "Mr. Hanged Man, have you received the blood of the ghost shark?" Alger nodded. "Thank you very much. The ghost shark is not an ordinary Beander creature. I didn't expect you to obtain it so quickly. As agreed, I will tell you the spectator formula." As his voice fell, Alger looked at Eve. Audrey paused, then also looked at Eve. Eve chuckled and said, "You can ask Mr. Fool for a private discussion." No sooner had she spoken than Audrey looked at Klein, and Alger followed suit. "Mr. Fool, may we have a private discussion?" Audrey asked, curious and expectant. Klein nodded, then said, "You may discuss." "Is that all?" Audrey looked down to check herself, then observed her surroundings. "I don't feel any changes." "How magical." Audrey didn't feel any changes, marveling at Mr. Fool's mystery and power. Alger also felt no changes, marveling at the Fool's power, to be able to exclude the Empress and create a private space for them to communicate. Klein smiled cunningly in his heart. Of course, they wouldn't feel any changes, because Klein hadn't done anything. He couldn't do it at all. But it didn't matter. There were only the four of them here. As long as Klein didn't say anything, and Eve didn't say anything, who would know? Chapter 53, Acting Method. Alger turned his head and said in a deep voice, "The concoction of low-sequence potions is very simple, but when adding ingredients, you can use a little less, but never more. You should know about Beander losing control, right?" Audrey nodded. She wasn't completely ignorant of the Beander world. If it weren't for her unwillingness to be restricted, she could have become a Beander long ago. "That's good, he doesn't need to explain." Alger continued, "A little less shouldn't deviate too much. You can familiarize yourself with chemical experiments first." "I have studied chemical experiments." Audrey nodded gently, sighing in her heart, "Mr. Hanged Man is truly responsible. The main ingredients are the eyes of a pair of adult manhar fish, 35 milliliters of blackhorn fish blood. The auxiliary ingredients are 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of ox-tooth peony powder, and 7 petals of elf flower." After Alger finished speaking, he considerately repeated it again, worried that Audrey wouldn't remember. Crocus essence. Under Alger's guidance, Audrey successfully repeated the potion formula. To prevent herself from forgetting or making mistakes, Audrey repeated it several times in her mind. After ensuring that she had remembered it and wouldn't make a mistake, Audrey raised her hand to request an end to their private conversation. "Our transaction is complete," Audrey said, a smile flashing in her forest green eyes. Beneath her maidenly reserve, her yearning for the mysterious was hard to conceal. "Does Miss Eve have any needs?" Alger praised Audrey in his heart. After guessing that Eve might be a member of the Fool's backing, he wanted to communicate with Eve, extract some information, and by understanding Eve, infer the Fool's affiliated power. But he didn't dare to probe rashly, worried about exposing himself and angering the Fool. Now, Audrey had conveniently given him an opportunity. He looked at Eve and echoed, "We can provide you with help. Mr. Hanged Man is a Beander of the Sailor Pathway, right?" Eve curved her lips, not directly answering Audrey but instead looking at Alger and asking. Although it was a question, her tone was unusually certain. Alger was startled. He quietly observed the Fool, who sat at the head of the table. Seeing that he still maintained his usual leisurely appearance, as if everything was under control, he sat on the bronze chair, his fingers gently tapping the armrest, producing a faint sound, one tap after another. The Fool told her. Alger's heart felt as if it had been tightly gripped by a hand. In the last gathering, he revealed that he had 2 potion formulas, Sailor and Spectator. Coupled with the ghost shark blood he traded, if the Fool knew the Seafarer formula, it wouldn't be difficult to guess that he was a Beander of the Sailor Pathway. Is this a warning to him? Alger concealed his abnormality, nodded at Eve, and asked, "How did you know?" "I just happened to know the formula, and I simply made a connection. I didn't expect to guess correctly. Is it really just a coincidence?" Alger suppressed the shock and doubt in his heart, staring at the blue figure behind the gray fog, weighing the pros and cons in his mind. "For safety's sake, I will temporarily assume Eve belongs to the Fool's faction." If it was true, he could discern the Fool's intentions from Eve and avoid inadvertently offending them. If it was false, there would be no loss. Having struggled in the Beander world for so many years, Alger had always been cautious and never relied on luck. Placing himself in a disadvantageous position in his mind was always better than being in a predicament in reality. Eve looked at Alger, who appeared normal on the surface, and smiled inwardly. "I can't outplay those 1,000-year-old foxes, but I can certainly outplay you. I have the formula for the Sailor Pathway Sequence 6 Wind Blessed," Eve said. You can trade it for all the blood of a black abyss devil fish. A carrot after the stick. Alger's mind brought up that famous saying of Emperor Rosal. He breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Eve truly represented the fool's intentions, it also meant that although the fool was somewhat displeased with his little schemes, he wasn't prepared to pursue the matter. He was safe. Okay, Alger nodded. I will help you find it as soon as possible. Does Miss Eve have the subsequent formula for spectator? Audrey looked at their transaction and asked expectantly. I'm very sorry, Miss Justice. Eve shook her head and said, I don't currently have the subsequent formula for spectator. Before the young lady next to her could show disappointment, Eve added, perhaps at the next gathering. Does Eve have the subsequent formula for spectator? Of course she does. But Eve couldn't monopolize all the business. That would turn the Tarot Club into her shop, not Zhou Mingrui's organization. The current Tarot Club was more of a gathering than an organization, and Eve intended to cultivate the Tarot Club into Zhou Mingrui's organization, which would be his future core group. Alger glanced at Audrey, then lowered his eyes, pondering Eve's words. Perhaps there will be in the future. Is she evaluating Justice's value? Evaluating whether she is worth their cultivation. An organization must possess a complete divine pathway, and perhaps one or more incomplete pathways, but if they wanted to obtain low-sequence formulas for other pathways, they would still be capable. They wanted to see if Justice was worth their effort to find the subsequent formula for spectator. Alger was swimming in an ocean of conspiracy theories, while Audrey's thoughts were much simpler. Thank you, Miss Eve. Audrey said, I also wanted to ask if there are any precautions. Alger observed the fool and saw that he had no intention of speaking, then looked at Eve. Eve respectfully said, Mr. Fool. As Eve's voice fell, silence spread through the magnificent palace. Audrey and Alger both silently looked at the fool, following Eve's gaze. The fool nodded slightly. Yes. Eve turned her head and looked at Audrey, saying, the acting method. The acting method. The acting method. Eve nodded and explained to the two, the key to potions is digestion. By acting, you digest the potion. The potion's name is the key to acting. Alger was startled, carefully chewing on the sentence. Audrey didn't quite understand the meaning of this sentence. She looked at Alger, who had just learned this sentence like her, and seeing his thoughtful expression, she curiously asked Eve, could you explain in more detail, Miss Eve? I will pay you for it. The payment shouldn't be given to me. Eve shook her head but still patiently explained, it's very simple. You are a spectator, so you act as a spectator, watching the actors perform from below the stage. But remember that you are the spectator, and do not be controlled by the actors. Audrey nodded, half understanding. So it's acting according to the potion's name. What's the use of that? Of course, it's not simply acting according to the name. The name is just a hint. That's the most superficial acting. Digestion of the potion is very slow. To digest it quickly, you need to find the core of the acting. When you have finished digesting, you will feel the completion of the potion's digestion yourself. It's a wonderful feeling. Eve said, the acting method can help you advance quickly. Without knowing the acting method, you can only rely on time to digest the potion, which is very slow. Perhaps you won't be able to advance to sequence 8 in 5 years. Audrey blinked her beautiful deep green eyes and said with a smile, thank you, Miss Eve, thank you, Mr. Fool. Audrey looked up and asked, what payment should I offer? Rosal's diary. Klein said in a deep voice. Rosal's diary. Alger's pupils contracted slightly. Not notes, but a diary. Could the fool understand Emperor Rosal's notes? He turned his head to look at Audrey. Sure enough, as he expected, she asked the question he wanted to ask. Diary. Audrey repeated, puzzled. The fool chuckled softly, let's just call it a diary. Chapter 54, Disguise. Although the fool did not admit it, Alger still believed that the fool should be able to understand Emperor Rosal's notes. Rosal's notes, if undecipherable, only held collection value. For a Beander, they were far less useful than the acting method. Klein tapped his fingers on the table, taking a deep breath. He still didn't dare to look at Eve. Of course, this sentence could have been said by Eve, but he couldn't possibly remain silent forever. He could only try his best to adapt. His voice steady, he said, "Help me collect Rosal's diary. This is the advance payment." Klein planned to tackle it from two angles, simultaneously learning about the hidden knowledge of the mystical world from both Eve and Rosal. While Eve knew a lot, she wasn't omniscient. Perhaps he could find some surprises in Rosal's diary. Eve's lips curled slightly. Indeed, human potential was limitless. Then how do we hand over the collected Rosal's diary to you? Audrey asked. Klein was not flustered in the slightest. After a few days of experimentation, he had figured out some of Saphira Castle's functions. Saphira Castle could not only materialize things Klein possessed but also display thoughts from people's minds. Following Klein's guidance, Audrey successfully created a piece of paper with her thoughts written on it. "How marvelous," Audrey exclaimed, then asked with a hint of fear, "Mr. Fool, can you know my thoughts?" "No," Klein said in a deep voice, "I am merely a guide. If you are unwilling, they will not be revealed." Audrey and Alger both let out a sigh of relief. At this point, the transaction segment was over. It ended quickly, but it was also within Eve's expectations, given the number of participants and demands. "How about we chat with each other?" Eve calculated that Zhou Mingrui's spirituality could last for a while. Instead of letting this once-a-week gathering end like this, she might as well find a way to expand their activities. The Tarot Club in the future couldn't just be an ordinary gathering or trading platform. Perhaps information that seems mundane to me is very important to others. Alger nodded. This wasn't an excessive request. After a moment of contemplation, he was the first to share some of his experiences at sea. During this time, Alger occasionally looked up at the fool at the head of the table. The fool behind the gray fog just quietly watched them converse, seemingly having no interest in joining them. Klein listened to their words, his mind blank. He knew nothing about pirates. He sighed inwardly, feigning indifference on the surface, but in reality, he was listening intently to the information. He listened as the three chatted from maritime experiences to politics, and as Audrey spoke about political issues. Klein tapped his fingers on the armrest, thought for 2 seconds, and proposed the civil service examination system from his previous life. If Miss Justice could implement it, it would be a good thing. He could also have Benson prepare in advance, perhaps even allowing him to pass the exam. Let today's gathering end here. Alger, Audrey, and Eve simultaneously rose and said, "As you command." Klein, however, did not rush to sever their connection. Instead, he looked at the two and casually said, "After you leave, you can contact me. I allow you to chant my name, the fool who does not belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who controls good fortune." Without giving the two time to react, Klein immediately cut off the connection. Crimson light surged forth and then quickly vanished like bubbles. In the magnificent ancient palace, only he and Eve remained. Phew, Klein leaned back, exhaling a deep breath, "It's finally over." "Not bad, Zhou Mingrui," Eve leaned back in her chair, giving Klein a thumbs up. "It's a pity you weren't an actor in your previous life." Klein rolled his eyes at Eve, materializing a notebook and throwing it at her. "That was so cringy." Eve reached out a hand and elegantly caught the notebook Klein had thrown. "You'll get used to it after a few more times. Skin, this thing, can grow thicker." Eve tossed the notebook in her hand a couple of times, then flicked her wrist, and the book traced a graceful arc in the air. "Won't you be more steady later? See, this is growth." Klein stared at the notebook flying straight towards him, pondering the possibility of elegantly catching it. The brown-covered notebook flew through the air. Its form gradually became ethereal, finally disappearing into the air. "Tisk tisk tisk," Eve shook her head, "Can't take a joke, little Joe. Get lost. If getting a thicker skin is growth, then you've already grown to an unparalleled degree," Klein retorted instinctively. "Perhaps your growth is measured in millennia, with your skin thickening with age, making you invincible with 1,000 layers of thick skin." "Nonsense," Eve said, touching her cheek, My skin's growth period is measured in millennia, there's still plenty of room for growth. Klein was speechless for a moment. He had seen thick-skinned people, but never one this thick. He complained with a headache, what on earth did this world do to you? In his previous life, Zhou Mingzhen also had a carefree, thick-skinned personality, but not to this extent. Sigh, Eve sighed, leaning her head against the back of the chair. Her eyes, as deep as the ocean, gazed at Klein, a faint sadness flowing within their sea-blue depths. I have a friend. He writes books, and I read them. I used to be embarrassed if he knew I read his books. Klein froze for a moment, then immediately sat up straight, a surge of panic filling his heart. He hadn't expected that a casual joke of his would actually hit Eve's sore spot. Now, it's been over 2,000 years, Eve slowly sat up straight, her lips curving. I'm sore. He hasn't updated. Eve shouted angrily, 2,000 years. Do you know how I've lived for these 2,000 years? Although I don't read his books anymore, he actually stopped updating for over 2,000 years. Klein silently swallowed the unspoken words. You. Klein took a deep breath, suppressing his anger. Give me back my tears. He was truly startled. Give back what? These are all genuine emotions, Eve said self-righteously. Look, I used to be embarrassed when my friend found out I was reading his books. If it happened again now, I wouldn't be embarrassed at all. If anyone should be embarrassed, it should be him. This book of yours, Klein stared at Eve. Based on Klein's understanding of his old sister, even her unupgraded thick skin wouldn't be embarrassed by a friend discovering her reading their book. He pondered for a moment, then asked tactfully, is it a proper book? What are you saying? What is this? Eve pulled out a small mirror and threw it at Klein. Am I that kind of person? The mirror flew through the air and, with a smack, accurately hit the ground by Klein's feet, shattering into a scattering of silver stars. Sweep the floor, Klein said, then leaned back, simulating a falling sensation as he left Saphira Castle. After descending from Saphira Castle, Klein stretched his limbs slightly. He felt that Saphira Castle had not given any feedback about his departure. His lips curved slightly as he picked up the newspaper and happily left the washroom. Klein entered the living room and sank into the soft sofa, his entire body enveloped. He shook the newspaper and unfolded it. A large, bolded, black headline caught his eye. Baron Edgar's wife files for divorce, accuses Baron of pursuing company employee during marriage. Klein sighed, realizing that gossip news was popular in any world. He then quickly skimmed the article. He already knew this news. In fact, Lady Edgar's evidence had been collected by Blackthorn Security Company. He was rereading it because of the innocent girl, Sherman. She was pursued by her boss shortly after starting work, then constantly harassed after refusing, and eventually lost her job because of it. Being dismissed just days after starting already made it difficult for her to find new employment. If she were also dragged into such an incident by the newspaper, her future life would likely be very difficult. Fortunately, the newspaper was conscientious, it neither included a photo nor revealed her name, address, or other information. Chapter 55, All Sides. In a dim basement, a faint candlelight flickered, struggling to illuminate the small space. Alger looked at his palm, slowly clenching it. A faint prickling sensation came from his palm, and his arm trembled slightly. A three-part honorific name. He had guessed that the fool should be a powerful Beander, but he only thought he was a demigod. After a long while, he relaxed his body, took a deep breath, and raised the candle, leaving the basement. Empress Burrow, Backland. Audrey faced her dressing mirror, gently caressing her chest. Audrey, it's all right. Mr. Fool is very gentle, definitely not one of those evil gods. Yes, that's right, absolutely not. After repeatedly reassuring herself in her heart, Audrey patted her face, took a deep breath, and clenched her small fists to cheer herself on. Come on, Audrey, you need to become a Beander quickly. Audrey immediately picked up the paper and pen that had been prepared on the table and silently wrote down the spectator formula. Picking up the paper, Audrey paused, then put it back on the table, writing many chemical materials and formulas on it, making it look like a chemical scratch paper. After folding the paper, Audrey adjusted her state and checked in the mirror that she looked no different from usual before leaving the room. "Susie," Audrey said, looking at the golden retriever guarding the door, squatting down and stroking her back, "you did very well, you're wonderful. Is Miss Rui Rui here too?" Audrey looked at the elegant black cat behind Susie, gently scratching her chin with her fingers. The soft cat fur rubbing against her fingertips brought Audrey a good mood. Miss Rui Rui's name comes from the Crimson Moon Cat. May the Crimson Moon Cat protect us. Meow. Miss Rui Rui let out a soft meow, purring comfortably, seeming to enjoy it greatly. Audrey withdrew her hand and stood up again. "Susie, I have something very important to do now and cannot accompany you too. You must entertain Miss Rui Rui well." "Woof," Susie barked. "Very good, Susie," Audrey said, "you are already a mature dog and a qualified lady. You must learn to entertain your own guests. Well then, goodbye, Susie, Miss Rui Rui." As soon as she finished speaking, Audrey lifted her skirt and ran off. She was going to the Hall family's warehouse to find materials. She ran somewhat hastily, but still maintained the elegance and demeanor of a lady, otherwise, she would be stopped, or even have to retake etiquette lessons. There were many Biander materials in the Hall family's warehouse. The warehouse's inventory greatly reduced the time Audrey spent searching. To prevent mistakes, Audrey took 2 copies of all the materials. In the chemical laboratory, Audrey looked at the beautiful potion in the glass bottle and happily spun around. It succeeded on the first try. "Audrey, you're great." Knock, knock, knock. A knock on the door sounded, and Audrey immediately put down the glass bottle and quickly walked out. "Annie," Audrey gently pushed the door back, leaving it slightly ajar to prevent the potion inside from being discovered. "Is something the matter?" "Miss Audrey," Annie said respectfully, "Madame Elena has arrived in Empress Borough, Backland. Mother wants to visit her with you." Madame Elena was Audrey's mother's older sister, deceived by a cunning merchant's sweet words and handsome face. She married him against her family's objections. That merchant, through her, successfully rose from Mr. Edgar to Baron Edgar, entering the circle of nobles. "Has she arrived already?" Audrey said. "Okay, please wait for me, just a little while longer and—" Bang! A sudden noise came from the chemical laboratory. Audrey froze for a moment, then reacted. "Oh no! Susie can open doors herself." Audrey immediately rushed into the laboratory, only to see broken glass everywhere. Susie was sitting on the floor, wagging her tail happily, looking at her. "Oh, my goodness," Annie peeked in and exclaimed, "Miss Audrey, don't go in, you'll get hurt. We need to find someone to clean it up quickly. Also, miss, your actions just now were really not like a lady. If something like this happens again, I must consider asking Madam to make you retake etiquette lessons." Audrey didn't hear a word. She felt she was about to faint ungracefully. The materials were fine, she had prepared 2 copies. But Susie? Would Susie be alright after drinking the potion? Worry filled her heart, and Audrey thought of Mr. Fool's honorific name. Perhaps she could ask the fool. Audrey closed her eyes and then opened them. She looked at Annie and said, "I understand. Let's go change clothes." "Yes, miss." Audrey followed behind Annie, and Susie also came out, happily running to Audrey's feet. "Susie looks very happy, could it be because of the potion?" "Woof, woof, woof." Susie suddenly barked at the window. Audrey immediately looked over, finding nothing outside the window. "Susie, you." Before the 3 words, "What's wrong?" could come out, Susie rushed towards the window. "Susie, don't run around, be careful. Quickly get out of the way." Susie ran too fast and bumped into the nearby dessert stand. There were no desserts on the stand now, but there were several teacups. A porcelain white teacup wobbled and fell from the dessert stand. Clink. Sherman steadily caught the falling teacup and placed it back on the office desk with extremely light movements, without making a sound throughout. Phew! Sherman let out a sigh of relief and tiptoed around the office, searching. "Don't be nervous, don't be nervous," Sherman kept repeating in her mind. "It's just finding an account book, it's very simple. Find all the account books, then copy them down, and you'll have enough contribution to exchange for a potion. Sherman originally joined this building materials company to prepare for exploring the company at night, but she was fired before she was ready and had no idea where the account books were, so she could only search one by one. This was her first time doing something like this, but if nothing unexpected happened, she would probably have to visit this building materials company every night for a while. This building materials company under Baron Edgar was somewhat famous, and the content of the account books would probably be extensive, not something that could be copied in one night. Moreover, if his business really had problems, there would probably be hidden account books. Sherman sighed in her heart, thinking of the huge workload, and secretly cursed Baron Edgar for being a scoundrel. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have to come here at night, terrified, to copy account books. She didn't know why her teacher asked her to investigate the accounts of this building materials company, guessing that it was probably because this Baron had done something unsavory, which was why he was being watched. Thinking of this, Sherman cursed Baron Edgar again in her heart. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 56, False. The porcelain teacup smashed onto the floor. Crack. A shattering sound echoed, and fragments flew out. Ah! Annie shrieked, pulling Audrey back repeatedly. Susie had already left before the cup hit the ground, so she wasn't hurt. Audrey felt relieved and was about to look out the window to see what Susie was barking at, when she saw a black cat crouching on the previously empty windowsill. Rui Rui. Was Susie just barking at it? Oh, dear, today is truly unlucky, Annie exclaimed. Perhaps we should go to the church tomorrow to pray to ward off bad luck. Annie motioned for a few maids to sweep up the fragments. Audrey watched Rui Rui on the window. The black cat seemed to have only been attracted by the recent sound, glanced into the room, then jumped off the window and disappeared into the night. Audrey stared blankly out the window. She felt that Rui Rui seemed very mysterious. This mystery wasn't the mystery brought by unknown information, but a momentary feeling. This feeling had no reason, it only lasted for a moment before disappearing, making Audrey wonder if it was just her illusion. Rui Rui should just be an ordinary cat. Audrey withdrew her gaze and said to Annie, Annie, let's go. Yes, miss. Audrey linked arms with Caitlin and boarded the carriage. The crimson moonlight draped a thin veil over the galloping carriage. The carriage stopped outside a luxurious villa. Audrey helped her mother alight. Aunt Elena was already waiting for them by the door. Oh, my dear Elena, Caitlin looked at the haggard Elena, her heart aching as she touched her cheek. You. Caitlin choked up, unable to speak. Aunt, Audrey looked at Elena with concern. I'm fine, Caitlin. Elena placed her hand on Caitlin's hand, comforting her softly. Come in quickly. How can we let our little princess endure this cold night wind outside? Come in quickly. Elena led Caitlin and Audrey to sit down at the coffee table. I've prepared many refreshments for you. Elena personally took the refreshments and placed them on the coffee table, then said to the maids, You may leave. Yes. Elena watched the maids, retreating figures and the slowly closing door. The sorrow in her heart could no longer be suppressed, tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. Caitlin, oh, Caitlin, Elena sobbed, I thought he loved me. Caitlin rushed over and hugged Elena, gently stroking her back, not knowing how to comfort her. Audrey sat opposite, feeling very sad. I never thought it would come to this. I just wanted to scare him at the time, but he didn't explain at all. Elena wiped her tears and hugged her sister back. Do you think he feels guilty? Caitlin's anger flared up instantly. She gritted her teeth, frustrated, and said, Goddess, did he give you a love potion? You're still thinking about him even now. Caitlin wanted to say more, but seeing her sister's tears pour down like a flood, she said helplessly and heartbrokenly, Please stop thinking about him, Elena. Don't think about anything related to him anymore. From now on, stay away from him, stay away from Tingen, stay away from anything connected to him. I'm not thinking about him, Elena stammered, and I have to go back to Tingen in 3 days. What? Caitlin said furiously, do you know what you're doing? No, I'm not going to see him. I entrusted a security company to investigate Darien, and 3 days from now is my second payment to them, Elena quickly explained. But, Audrey hesitated, then looked down at her dear aunt, saying tactfully, you could entirely have your butler or maids do these things, and the investigation is already over. You could have paid them the full commission before you left. Also, what do you mean by second time? Is there a third time, a fourth time? Compared to Audrey's tact, Caitlin was much more direct. No, there won't be a fourth time. Our commission is paid in 3 installments, Elena said weakly. This is a new commission I placed before I left, and it's not finished yet. Caitlin was so angry that her vision went black. She wanted to curse fiercely to vent her anger, but her upbringing and her heartache for her sister prevented her from doing so. Finally, Caitlin gave up in exasperation. She grabbed Elena's arm and said, in any case, you absolutely cannot go to Tingen. I will tell father. You shouldn't think about leaving Backland these next few days. The butler or maids can pay the commission. Perhaps father's suspicions back then were all true, he really is a scoundrel. It's been so many years, why are you still clinging to this small matter? You're still defending him. Audrey looked at Aunt Elena, who was crying with her hand over her mouth, feeling both sad and helpless, and silently sighed. She recalled the word, love-struck, invented by Emperor Rosal, perhaps it referred to people like Aunt Elena. It was just a pity that Emperor Rosal had not left behind any methods to deal with being love-struck. Back then, Elena's family did not approve of Elena marrying Darien Edgar, but Elena insisted on marrying him, even threatening to die to force her family to reluctantly agree to the marriage. Audrey had met her former uncle-in-law a few times. He was excellent in appearance, temperament, and personality, and sweet talk came easily to him. No wonder he had so thoroughly captivated Aunt Elena. Elena met Darien while traveling on the southern continent. Darien also made his fortune on the southern continent. Later, for Elena, he returned to the northern continent. He owned many businesses and was very busy with work, often traveling. When Baron Edgar was on a business trip, Elena would come to Backland to visit her family. When Audrey was little, Elena would hold her and happily recount their love story, and they always appeared very affectionate whenever they were together. Elena stubbornly believed that her family disapproved of her marriage to Darien Edgar because they looked down on Edgar. To prevent Darien Edgar from receiving scorn from the nobles, Elena even left her family, moved out of Backland's Empress Borough, and went to Tingen with Baron Edgar, and after marriage, she consistently worked to help Edgar become a noble. In fact, this was indeed an important reason. Marriages among nobles were often alliances, emphasizing bloodlines and requiring similar family backgrounds. And back then, Elena's family used every possible means to oppose this marriage. When Elena announced her intention to marry Darien Edgar, her family thoroughly investigated him and found that some of Edgar's assets had unclear origins, but it seemed to be just a small error in the ledger. This error was very small, and Elena insisted that it was a staff oversight, while Elena's father firmly maintained that Edgar was involved in illegal business, and that this was money laundered too hastily and not cleaned thoroughly, using this as a reason to fiercely criticize Edgar and oppose Elena marrying him. Chapter 57, The Scapegoat. At 11 p.m., the Moretti siblings said goodnight to each other and retired to their rooms. Klein took off his coat and placed his hands on the buttons of his shirt, about to unbutton it, when he heard a strange, poochie-poochie, sound. Klein's hands paused, and then he saw the wall of the room become illusory. A round cat head with white bat wings flew out of the wall. This is, old sister's messenger, little Poochie. Old sister had told him that her messenger was a cat head that made, poochie-poochie, sounds and possessed the strength of a demigod. Klein was shocked at the time. Using a demigod as a messenger, was this the aura of a big shot? Klein looked at the messenger before him, a round, white cat head, with orange on its right ear and eye. Although it only had a head and no body, it wasn't eerie at all, instead, it was very cute. So cute, Klein had just praised it in his heart when he saw little Poochie's body tremble. Suddenly, a pair of robust arms, completely out of proportion with its body, emerged from its sides. The muscles were bulging, and one arm was thicker than both of Klein's arms combined. Little Poochie opened its mouth. The small cat mouth, which was tiny when closed, instantly transformed into a monster's gaping maw, filled with sharp, shark-like teeth. When fully opened, the mouth occupied a full third of little Poochie's volume. It stretched its muscular arms into its mouth and pulled out a snow-white envelope, placing it on Klein's desk. It even pushed it further in, as if afraid it would fall. After placing the letter, the gaping maw slowly closed, and little Poochie returned to its original cute appearance. Poochie, it happily and softly cried out, then re-entered the wall, leaving behind a dumbfounded Klein. Ah, this, Klein glanced at the wall where little Poochie had disappeared, his mouth twitching. He felt a kind of beauty that was too bizarre for words. He looked at the envelope on the table. It was spotless, without any saliva, so he felt relieved to pick it up. It was a letter from Frank Lee. He first greeted Klein in the letter, then asked about the taste of the fruit fish, mentioned his upcoming research species, and finally eagerly hoped that Klein and Eve could visit the future as guests. Klein picked up his pen and wrote a reply, detailing Rui Rui's evaluation of the fruit fish, subtly suggesting that Frank could shift his hybridization efforts towards yield, and finally declined Frank's invitation, telling him that he had encountered some matters and would visit the future after they were resolved. Klein checked the contents of the letter, and after confirming it was correct, he took out a small silver bell from his coat and infused it with spirituality. The silver bell shook twice on its own but made no sound. Poochie. Little Poochie reappeared in the room. It glanced at the letter in Klein's hand and opened its gaping maw. Is it telling me to throw the letter into its mouth? Klein thought of the letter it had taken out of its mouth, and with a flick of his wrist, he threw the letter inside. Little Poochie closed its mouth, and with a Poochie sound, it once again disappeared from the room. Because of the Welch case, security companies ushered in a spring of development. Even the obscure Blackthorn Security Company continuously received 3 large orders. 2 were for Ms. Elena investigating Baron Edgar, handled by Fry, and 1 was received this afternoon, finding the kidnapped little Elliot, which was given to Klein and Leonard, who were at the company at the time. Although it was because they couldn't find any other security company that could take the job that they sought out Blackthorn Security Company. This was his first mission. No, this should be private work, Klein corrected himself in his mind. After the mission, Klein always felt like he had forgotten something but couldn't recall it, and he had this feeling after Leonard high-fived him. Old sister had said that Leonard was involved with a high-level existence. Klein sat on the sofa, reading the newspaper, thinking that he would go to Saphira Castle to divine after work. No, he couldn't divine something involving a high-level existence, he should tell old sister instead. The sound of a door opening rang out, and Roseanne's sweet voice said, "Captain, you're back." "Oh, and who is this?" Dunn stepped aside, revealing a disheveled middle-aged man behind him. He had no coat, and his clothes were torn in several places, with clumps of muddy yellow staining his white shirt. "This is Lord Sesama," Dunn introduced. "Lord Sesama has arrived," Klein said in surprise. Although he knew Lord Sesama would probably make a wasted trip, as a participant in the case, he still had to put on an act. Thanks to Leonard, Dunn's deep blue eyes showed a hint of annoyance. "I completely forgot to pick up Lord Sesama." "Wow," Roseanne exclaimed, "Leonard has gotten smarter." Leonard's handsome brows furrowed, and he said unhappily, "What do you mean, gotten smarter?" Indeed, just thinking of picking someone up isn't necessarily getting smarter," Roseanne said. "Normally, anyone would think of it. But we completely forgot," Klein said with a frown. "That's a bit suspicious. And someone was preventing me from entering Tingen," Sesama said with a grim expression. "If it weren't for Captain Dunn, I wouldn't have reached Tingen for another month." "That black cat," Dunn guessed with a solemn tone, as Sesama had come specifically for that black cat. Klein's mouth twitched imperceptibly. Rui Rui was truly being wronged by this accusation. Possibly, Sesama nodded, but why didn't it stop you from coming to pick me up? Because we were very fast, it didn't know, didn't react. No, Dun negated his own guess. If it truly wanted to prevent Lord Sesama from entering Tingen and had hindered him along the way, it should have been constantly monitoring. Perhaps it wasn't it, Leonard tentatively said. Seeing the captain and Lord Sesama immediately look at him, Leonard quickly added, I'm just guessing. That's also a line of thought. Klein seized the opportunity to follow Leonard's words. Maybe there really is a third party, and they were the ones who stopped Lord Sesama. But even if there is a third party, Dun said, they should also be cooperating with the Black Cat. Otherwise, why would they hinder Lord Sesama on behalf of the Black Cat? Klein pondered for a moment, then tentatively said, perhaps it's not for the Black Cat. They have other motives and don't want Lord Sesama to come to Tingen. Alright, there are no signs indicating the existence of a third party right now, so let's not make wild guesses, Sesama said. Regardless of whether this so-called third party exists, that Black Cat must be investigated. First, investigate the Black Cat. Once the Black Cat is thoroughly investigated, we will know whether that third party truly exists. Klein felt like crying inwardly. Sorry, Rui Rui, I tried my best. This scapegoat is stuck to you like it's been glued on. And Rui Rui really doesn't need to be investigated. She just toured Tingen and has long since run off to play in some other city. How can you investigate her? Klein felt that the third party almost certainly existed. The urgent task was to investigate that third party, as they were the ones truly malicious towards the Nighthawks, perhaps brewing some grand conspiracy. Klein was always sensitive to being watched. He felt someone intently staring at him. Following that gaze, Leonard's green eyes, with a mysterious smile, were fixed on him. Klein retracted his gaze, pondering. Did the entity behind Leonard sense the existence of the third party and alert Leonard? Chapter 58, The Truth. The crimson moonlight draped Tingen in a thin veil. The veil flowed like water, creeping in through the window, caressing the young man's face, and filling every corner of the room. Klein stood before the dressing mirror, awaiting today's lesson. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a slender hand emerged from the center of the ripple, grabbing Klein's collar and yanking it sharply. Klein stumbled and was pulled into the mirror by that hand. Oh, my dear Zhou Mingrui, Eve said with a smile, are you ready to receive Big Sister's loving education? Klein tugged at his collar, straightening the disheveled neckline Eve had pulled. Not yet. Oh. Eve stroked her chin and said, tell me, what is it? After high-fiving Leonard today, I felt like I had forgotten something. Klein asked, did the existence behind Leonard make a move? Of course, otherwise how could you little rookies possibly notice? Eve said with a smile, don't worry, I've had a friendly chat with the existence behind him, and I've pretty much figured it out, it won't harm any of you. Klein paused, then asked, who is the existence behind Leonard? A weakened angel, hiding inside Leonard to recover from injuries. An angel. Another angel. Little Tingen is truly full of hidden talents, Klein thought to himself. It's actually hiding inside Leonard. Wait, Klein looked up at Eve and asked, Leonard wasn't present when you two communicated, was he? Relax, relax, Eve patted Klein's shoulder. Just as Klein was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he heard Eve say, that was a given. Klein opened his mouth then closed it, not knowing what to say. He thought of Leonard's mysterious smile today, and finally asked, deflated, then I must have been exposed to, how much? Don't worry, would I really trick you? Eve waved her hand and said, I only said you and I have some connection. As for what kind of connection, I didn't say, letting them fill in the blanks themselves. Yes, you could. Klein nodded and said decisively. Big Sister is so sad, you don't trust me at all. Eve covered her chest, looking on the verge of tears. Children grow up, they all. As Eve spoke, she secretly glanced at Klein. Seeing him staring at her speechlessly, she thought for a moment, then cleared her throat twice and said with a cheerful smile, what did you forget? Do you remember it now? I went to Saphira Castle to divine, it was the Antigonus family's notebook. Isn't that great? Eve said, You even asked me about it before. See, I told you the clue would find you soon. There's another matter, Klein said with a frown, it's about Rui Rui. Lord Sesama was obstructed when he came to Tingen, and they planned to investigate Rui Rui first. Sesama came to Tingen. That's simple enough, Eve said indifferently. Let Rui Rui wander around Tingen, deliver medicine to some injured people. Let the Nighthawks know that this is just a kind cat, and you are just an ordinary person she saved, who just happened to see her. That's a plan, but who stopped Lord Sesama from entering Tingen? What is their purpose? Klein asked one question after another. Eve lowered her head, her long black hair falling forward. She slowly raised her hand, pinching the ends of her hair, recalling the conversation from 1,000 years ago. Ammonizes, Michael has fallen. He wouldn't just fall like that. Are you saying? Ammonizes did not answer her, and she did not probe. Sometimes the truth is hard to face, and she would rather be an ignorant fool. When Medici fell, she once thought of probing, of verifying, but in the end, she gave up. If it were true, she could neither face Adam, nor the fallen Medici and Michael. This was the second time she had the urge to probe, and it was for Zhou Mingrui. Her participation in the Battle of Mysteries, and her participation with, was completely different. But probing this matter was extremely difficult. A king of angels of the spectator pathway, if he wanted to disguise himself, no one could discover him. Moreover, there was no evidence for this matter itself, unless he admitted it himself. So, what Eve thought of was the simplest method of elimination. If it wasn't Pales, then the only one in Tingen worthy of her attention was Zhou Mingrui. No, to be precise, Zhou Mingrui, the owner of Saphira Castle. Eve slapped Klein's shoulder with a thwack, and said mysteriously, beware of the spectator. Klein was stunned for a moment, then realized that high-level spectators are good at scripting. You can go discuss it with Leonard, Eve said with a smile. Behind the Sesama incident, there are two, existences. One obstructed Sesama, and the other. Eve curled her lips. Sesama's successful entry into Tingen might have been partly due to it. Klein was taken aback, a living sealed artifact. Eve nodded, shrugging her shoulders, just a guess. All right, anything else you want to say? Klein was silent for a while. After a long time, he slowly lowered his head and opened his mouth, saying, I read the newspaper today. The Welch case has been closed. It seems Mr. Welch has believed the police's explanation. Eve maintained her original smile, looking at Klein. He must be very sad. Klein was silent for a moment, then looked up at his sister. Eve's smile grew smaller and smaller, finally flattening her lips, putting away her usual carefree demeanor, and she was also looking at him. Klein lowered his eyelashes, grabbed Eve's sleeve and said, Mom and Dad must be even sadder to have lost two sons at once. Eve's eyelashes trembled slightly, and she silently hugged Klein. After a long time, she spoke, actually, we are lucky. I know. Klein hugged Eve back, and said in a muffled voice, Melissa and Benson will also be very sad when they find out they lost the real Klein. Klein looked down at Eve, and said with a bitter smile, I want to tell them, not just because of you. Benson and Melissa are the ones who should know about Klein's death the most. When will you tell them? Eve's voice was very soft, and she said gently, I will work hard to advance, apply for a transfer to another city or join the Red Gloves, and tell them before leaving Tingen. Klein lowered his eyes to hide his emotions. They need time to digest this news, and they probably won't want to see me during that time, and I don't want to be abandoned by them. Give me some more time. Even if I can't continue to be a big brother or a little brother, at least, I won't. Eve gently stroked Klein's back, over and over, comforting the grieving young man. Klein calmed down for a while, his breathing gradually steadying, and he became a little more composed. No matter what the outcome, in my heart, Benson and Melissa will always be my family. This cover is not the one I asked my friend to draw. When I woke up today, there was already a cover. Chapter 59, Deception. There was no lecture tonight. Eve and Klein sat and talked a lot, about before and after their transmigration. It was all about daily life, the precious beauty of what was once ordinary. They talked for a long time, until Klein started yawning before he left. Back home, Eve didn't rush to bed as usual. She sat in front of the dressing mirror, and ripples spread across its surface. Soon, a notebook appeared, with a white quill resting quietly beside it. She looked at the several lines of blackened text in the notebook. The ink flowed like water to the side, forming a large inkblot. As the ink receded, the handwriting gradually became visible. Although Ince Zangwil tried his best to stop him, Sesama still came to Tingen. They began to suspect Ince Zangwil's existence. Eve continued to read expressionlessly. It was all arrangements that favored the Nighthawks. She wasn't surprised. In fact, this was precisely the effect she wanted to achieve. Eve had deceived the Quill of Alzuhad. At the time, Eve had merely casually divined whether Adam was paying attention to Tingen, not holding out much hope. Who knew that she would actually succeed in divining it, without any trace of interference? This result made her abandon the idea of directly taking the Quill of Alzuhad. Perhaps as soon as she had the thought of acting, he would appear first. The divination result was revealed by Eve to the Quill of Alzuhad, who was observing her at the time. By using Adam to force the Quill of Alzuhad to lean towards herself, and to prevent the Quill of Alzuhad from directly escaping Tingen, she chose to deceive it. For the underlying reason, she let it remain in Ince Zangwil's hands. This meant that Adam had a plan in Tingen, and during its time in Ince's hands, it would be safe. Eve would also continue to pay attention to it. But if it ran away directly, breaking free from Adam's plan, she might not necessarily continue to allow it to stay in someone else's hands, and Eve might not necessarily continue to pay attention to it. This way, in the eyes of the Quill of Alzuhad, it had a chance to get involved with Eve. As long as it seized the opportunity to persuade Eve, and once Eve had the idea of taking it away, it would find a way to kill Ince Zangwil. As soon as he died and became a pawn, the underlying reason would no longer concern him, and Eve would take it away. As a king of angels with a very poor relationship with Adam, staying with Eve was naturally safer than staying with Ince Zangwil. Eve's attitude was also very clear. She had no intention of handing it over to Adam. She was only not taking it because she wanted to see the underlying reason. That's why its attitude was so fawning, actively trying to please Eve and actively helping Klein. That guy, while claiming things were terrible and calling Ince Zangwil the worst author, was actually subtly expressing his desire for a new master. Eve did indeed want to use the events in Tingen to pinpoint Adam's objective and thus confirm the truth. However, in Adam's plan, Ince Zangwil was merely an expendable chess piece. What happened to him wouldn't affect anything. Moreover, even if this failed, as long as Zhou Mingrui was still around, and as long as the suspicion was true, Adam would continue to pay attention to him. She would know sooner or later. Knowing early was good, but knowing late, in the interim period when she didn't know, she would prepare for the worst-case scenario. Because of the Antigonus family's notebook, Klein woke up exceptionally early today and rushed to the Blackthorn Security Company. By the time they returned from Royal Bieber's house, it was not yet 8 o'clock. Klein hadn't eaten breakfast yet, but the recent trip had left him with no appetite for it. Just as he thought he would have to go hungry all morning, an extra 10 pounds of income instantly cured his discomfort. This was several weeks of his salary. He remembered Eve's words from last night and sat in the reception hall, waiting for Leonard. Leonard went to monitor Baron Edgar last night. Ms. Alina's commission was to monitor the follow-up situation between Baron Edgar and Miss Sherman, and the commission was quite generous, with the first payment being £200. This kind of surveillance task required working day and night, with the night portion often assigned to those of the sleepless pathway. Klein sat on the sofa, reading the newspaper. After a long while, a door opened. Leonard still had the appearance of a romantic poet, not wearing a coat, with the top 2 buttons of his white shirt undone. He yawned, scratched his head, and said to Klein, "Good morning, Klein." "Good morning, Leonard." Klein put down the newspaper, folded it, and placed it on the sofa. "You look very tired. Do you want to rest in the lounge for a bit? I can make you a cup of coffee or black tea." "Ah, I'm not really tired, no. Leonard casually half-reclined on the sofa, arms spread out on the backrest. Just as he was about to refuse, he suddenly changed his mind and said, "But I do want to rest for a bit longer, thank you." Am I too subtle, or did you trade your IQ for good looks? Klein thought to himself. Leonard stood up and followed Klein to the lounge. There was no one else in the lounge at the moment. Klein glanced at the holy emblem of Evernight hanging on the wall and immediately felt a little guilty, secretly praising the goddess in his heart. Wait, the goddess wouldn't hear, would she? Black tea or coffee? Coffee. Klein took out the coffee can stored in the lounge and made a cup for Leonard. The two sat facing each other. Klein hesitated for a moment, thinking, the goddess probably wouldn't pay attention to me, right? Klein pondered for a moment, and finally decided to speak, "Be careful of the spectator." Leonard looked at Klein in confusion, tilting his head as if listening to something. After a while, Leonard looked up at Klein and said, "What did he say?" Behind the Sesama incident, there are two existences, one of which is an activated sealed artifact. Although there was no one else in the lounge, Klein still lowered his voice and spoke softly. An activated sealed artifact of the spectator pathway. Pales's heart skipped a beat. Could it be the quill of Alzuhad? If it really was the quill of Alzuhad, then he would come looking for her sooner or later. Pales felt that this world was really too unfriendly to his old heart. He was hiding well in Tingen, who knew Eve would suddenly come knocking. At that time, Pales felt that he was going to die. Eve had always secretly been willing to support Amon's ascension to godhood. Fortunately, for unknown reasons, she changed her mind, but who knows, she might change her mind again someday. In short, Pales felt that he was very dangerous now, and Leonard was not doing well either, being supervised by Pales to digest the potion, striving to leave Tingen as soon as possible. Pales's hanging heart hadn't settled yet, and today brought another big surprise. His heart almost jumped into his throat. Eve hadn't left, and Adam came. Is Eamon next? What is your relationship with him? Leonard relayed Pales's words. I don't know. Klein shook his head, looking confused. I'm just a weak sequence 9, what could I know? But he's very good to me, and he doesn't ask me to believe in him. Goddess, I haven't changed my faith, please don't strike me down. Klein added in his heart. Although he felt that the goddess wouldn't pay attention to a small sequence 9 like him, next to the holy emblem of Evernight, Klein still felt extremely guilty. The old man said he knows. Leonard scratched his head, looked left and right, and leaned closer to Klein, saying, I knew you were a man with secrets too. Anything else? Klein asked. Besides that sentence, is there anything else? Klein explained, looking at Leonard's confused eyes. No, Leonard said, puzzled, is something wrong? No, nothing. Klein took a deep breath. Perhaps being a riddle maker was a necessary condition for becoming a high-level existence. Found a plot bug, fixed chapter 45. Thanks to the commenter for the reminder. Klein sighed inwardly and, after finishing his conversation with Leonard, left Blackthorn Security Company. He wandered the streets for a while looking for a notebook, then went to the Seer Club. The extra £10 of income meant he no longer needed to wait for funding approval and had enough money to become a member of the Seer Club. Although they had only known each other for a few days, even Audrey had already become quite familiar with each other. Eve had a faint smile on her lips, holding a small silver spoon with 2 fingers, slowly stirring her coffee clockwise to dissolve the settled sugar cube. Her mood was not as pleasant as it appeared on the surface. Miss Audrey quietly observed the young girl opposite her, thinking, Miss Eve is very at ease with Susie, their relationship is truly good. Eve took a small sip of coffee, allowing the little spectator opposite her to observe her without minding. She looked at the golden retriever lying at her feet. This must be Miss Justice's Beander pet, right? Susie often comes to find me on her own. Miss Eve is very trusting of her, Audrey said with a smile, gently stroking the black cat curled up on her lap. She only came once and already knows the way, she's so smart. Yes, Susie is indeed very smart. She often runs off, and sometimes I have trouble finding her. Eve put down her teacup and picked up her handbag beside her, saying, I'm not worried. Susie's combat strength is very strong. All the cats and dogs in Backland bow their heads and stand obediently when they see her. Eve stood up, held her skirt, and bowed to Audrey, saying, Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Audrey. Audrey also stood up and returned the bow. Their afternoon tea only lasted an hour. Audrey watched Eve's departing back, deflatedly puffed out her cheeks, and sat back down in her chair. She had already asked Mr. Fool, and pets could also drink potions. Susie was perfectly fine and had even learned to speak. At that time, she wondered if Susie might also be a pet who had drunk a potion. If so, Miss Eve should also be a Beander. The more she thought about it, the more she felt it was true, so Audrey always steered the conversation towards Susie during afternoon tea, but unfortunately, she only got some ambiguous information. Audrey looked at Susie at her feet, rubbed her head, and said, Keep it up, Susie, one day we will know. 18 Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough, Backland. Do you still want to recruit that little girl into the club, meow? Susie nimbly jumped onto the sofa, licked her front paws, and asked. Eve immediately lay down on the sofa, monopolizing the entire sofa. Susie was squeezed off and jumped onto the armrest of the sofa. Eve rolled over and lay on her stomach on the sofa, raising her head and propping her face with one hand as she looked at Susie squatting in front of her, saying, It's not impossible. Meow, you're even trying to poach your own brother's connections. Susie said disdainfully. What are you talking about? This is called. Eve racked her brain, recalling the political concepts she had memorized in her previous life, saying some clichés she didn't fully understand but felt could be applied to the situation. Integrating resources, human resources, maximizing benefits. All right, meow, Susie said while washing her face. You always like to find some grand excuses for yourself. After speaking, Susie's movements paused, and she turned her head stiffly to look at Eve. Eve looked at Susie, chuckled self-deprecatingly, and abruptly dropped the hand propping her head, burying her face into the soft sofa. Sigh, after all, I am a hypocritical person. Eve's voice was muffled because she was buried in the sofa. I'm sorry, Susie extended a front paw, seemingly wanting to touch Eve. I didn't mean. I know. Eve suddenly propped herself up with both hands on the sofa, raising her upper body, and said with her usual carefree and cheerful demeanor, What's wrong with being hypocritical? Am I not supposed to live just because I'm hypocritical? Ha ha ha, it's good, it makes me understand myself better. Susie looked at the smiling Eve, jumped off the armrest, squatted on the sofa, and placed a front paw on Eve's hand, her brown eyes gazing at her. The two stared at each other in silence. After a long while, Eve was the first to avert her gaze, awkwardly curving her lips, and said, Susie, you should go down first. I can't hold on much longer, this is very tiring. Eve's arms trembled slightly, as if she really couldn't support herself anymore. Susie glanced at her, retracted her front paw, and jumped off the sofa. Eve immediately collapsed, and after more than 10 seconds, she sat up, swung her arms back and forth twice, then alternately massaged her arms with both hands. Her brown eyes watched her the entire time. After massaging for a while, Eve waved to Susie and said, Go wander around Tingen, and remember to get close to the Nighthawks but don't be too obvious. Okay. A phantom, star-studded door formed on the pristine white wall. Susie looked back, and Eve, seeing her look, waved at her, smiling, and said, Remember to come back for dinner. I'll cook myself, this time, it definitely won't lose to Miss Audrey's chef. Susie turned her head, walked towards that door, and jumped out from an unmanned alley. Her soft paw pads stepped on the ground of Tingen. She looked at her feet for a moment, her brown eyes moved, and she headed straight for No. 2 Narcissus Street. Upon reaching her destination, Susie sat at the door, waiting for Klein. Susie. After a long wait, Klein finally arrived. He stepped forward and asked, Is something wrong? Nothing. Susie walked in after Klein opened the door. I just wanted to come and see you. Susie's voice was a somewhat childish female voice, and her adult-like demeanor was very incongruous. Oh, all right. Klein looked at Susie, who had jumped onto the sofa, hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Do you need coffee or black tea?" Susie isn't an ordinary cat, she should be able to drink coffee and black tea, Klein thought to himself. No need, Susie said, I'll just stay here for a while, you can do your own thing and don't need to mind me. Susie, is something on your mind? Klein asked with concern, did you argue with old sister? The black cat shook her head, no longer speaking. Seeing that she didn't want to talk about it, Klein didn't press further. He put on an apron and prepared dinner for Melissa and Benson. He placed the dishes on the dining table, then turned his head and asked, do you want to stay for dinner? Benson and Melissa would like you. No, Eve prepared dinner, Susie shook her head, and I still have a task, I need to go. Saying that, she jumped onto the window. Susie looked back at Klein, opened her mouth, but said nothing. What's wrong? Klein looked at the window with a puzzled expression. Susie's figure was no longer there. Why do you all like to be riddlers? It smells so good. Melissa sniffed the aroma of the delicious food in the air. Klein, you're making something tasty again. Thinking of Klein's past, extravagance, and looking at the several dishes on the table, a hint of heartache appeared on Melissa's face. Although things aren't as difficult as before, we still need to be a bit frugal. Things like these, once a week is enough. Klein said somewhat helplessly, no, Melissa, twice a week is perfectly fine, and my salary will increase in the future, so 3 times a week won't be a problem. Susie listened to the warm bickering of the siblings and silently left. Go find the injured person. Chapter 61, On Sale Remarks. This is my first time writing a book, and I didn't know anything. I never thought I'd have a day where I'd write on sale remarks. I even specifically searched if it was mandatory to write them when a book goes on sale, ha ha ha. In the end, I decided to write them anyway, because there are some things I really want to talk about with everyone. First of all, this book was actually a work of self-entertainment for me at the beginning, started because of a very interesting idea. Because it was for self-entertainment, I didn't have ample preparation. I only had a vague outline, many details and plots were missing or thought up on the spot while writing. Now that I've written this far, it has even deviated quite a bit from the original outline, so I've revised the outline a lot. Therefore, my plot has many flaws and unreasonable parts, as do the combat and intellectual battles. They are really illogical and dumbed down. Perhaps I will revise the text after it's finished. Perhaps, we'll talk about that later. Actually, when I first started writing, I didn't think I could stick with it. When the first day's data was released, I found that there were 8 favorites. I was so happy I almost flew. Those 8 people made me feel full of motivation to write. Every day I saw the favorites increase, I would be very happy and have the drive to keep writing, even though there were times when new favorites were 0, but I didn't give up. I remember one time there were 33 new favorites, and I thought the app was glitching and added an extra 3, ha ha ha. And so I kept writing day after day, until one day a notification came, I could sign a contract. I never thought I could sign a contract. I had dreamed of it, but I felt I didn't have the ability. I certainly never thought it would go on sale so quickly, I thought I'd have to wait until 300,000 words. Now, let's talk about this book. Although I didn't think I could persist in finishing it at first, as my first contracted and on-sale novel, I will strive to give it a complete ending. Also, I think the biggest highlight of this book is the concept, the setting that Eve is Klein's elder sister. Many of you are probably reading this book because of that setting, right? I'm very clear about my own capabilities. My writing is amateurish, my characterizations are thin, the plot isn't handled well, and there are logical bugs. Many parts make me cringe when I read them myself, and some parts try to be emotional but completely lack the writing skill. Saying all this makes me feel so useless, but it's the truth. Sigh, but I will try my best to make this book not useless, at least not as useless as me. I read all of your comments. I really like them. I'm happy when I see praise, and sad when I see criticism. But whether they're good or bad, I'll accept them. I just hope you can be gentle with your criticism, I'm a bit sensitive. Most of the comments are about the plot, some are very interesting and I especially love reading them. This is a big reason why I love reading comments. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll try to fix things if I can. Previously, I saw a reader asking if they could know about Saphira Castle's knowledge. At the time, I hesitated whether to reply, but now I can't find it. Maybe I didn't scroll far enough, or maybe it was deleted. To prevent other readers from having similar doubts, I'll say this here, just knowing the name of Saphira Castle is fine. In Lord of the Mysteries, Leonard knew about Saphira Castle and even Lord of the Mysteries, but he didn't know what Lord of the Mysteries represented, only the name. Secondly, updates. To be honest, I've been quite lax with updates. In the future, I'll try my best not to stop updating. Oh, right, I have exams in the next few days, I'm scared, I hope I don't stop updating. Oh, also, I saw a reader asking about a group. I'm very socially anxious, so I don't have any plans to create a reader group for now. Of course, if any readers want to create one, I support it. Finally, of course, thanks to all the readers. Thank you for your support, thank you all. Without you, I would have given up writing a long time ago. Happy New Year, everyone. That's probably all. This is my first time writing on sale remarks, so please bear with any issues. I'm very sorry for not updating for so many days. I haven't ghosted, I'm just stuck. I have many scenes in my head, but I don't know how to connect them, so I plan to pause for a while. Please don't follow or subscribe for now. I'm really worried about whether I can finish it. Those of you with auto-subscribe should turn it off too. Come back when it reaches 500,000 words. Don't worry, this book won't die just because no one is subscribing. Chapter 62. Regarding Smith Marseille, esteemed readers, when I first tried to post chapter 102, it didn't go through and showed, under review. I couldn't directly modify and repost it while it was under review, so I copied it, made some changes, and posted it again, which went through immediately. As a result, the first version of the chapter that was under review also passed, and VIP chapters cannot be deleted. So now there are 2 chapter 102s. You're back so soon. Eve looked at Rui Rui in surprise, a fish in her hand being gutted, the smell of fish filling the air and wafting into the black cat's nose. Rui Rui elegantly walked with light steps to Eve's feet, rubbing her head against her calf. I came to see if dinner was ready. Zhou Mingrui has already finished several dishes, but you've only just started this one. You've been slacking off again. Scram, 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 Eve said, pushing Rui Rui with the back of her hand. How can you say that about me? Weren't you also looking for Zhou Mingrui during work hours? Hurry up and go to work, Eve said, rubbing her little ear with the back of her hand. I'll call you when dinner is ready. Rui Rui rolled her eyes at her, then jumped into the door made of starlight, returning to Tingen. The black cat's small nose twitched, catching the scent of blood in the air, following it all the way to the lower street. The lower street was a gathering place for the poor, with many mixed scents of blood. Some were faint, indicating that some time had passed since the injury and the wound had scabbed over. Some were very strong, suggesting a recent injury. Others were not only strong but also foul-smelling, likely from pus or even putrefaction. Rui Rui followed the foul smell, passing through the dirty streets, and arrived at a simple, dilapidated small inn. This was an inn specifically for vagrants, with very poor conditions. A single room had a dozen beds, which were merely hard wooden boards without pillows. A thin, tattered cloth with many holes served as a blanket. But a night's stay here only cost 2 pence, and guests could also use the communal washroom for free. Adequate sleep would give them more energy, and the washroom would make them cleaner, all of which would help them find work better. For vagrants, this was an excellent place. Many more vagrants could only disappear into forgotten corners. The black cat silently slipped into the inn. In the dim little room, several younger men gathered in a corner, chatting softly, reminiscing about their past lives. complaining about their current misery, and discussing where to find work tomorrow. Their voices were very low because most people were resting, and if they spoke loudly, they would incur the wrath of everyone else. The source of the bloodstain was a middle-aged man with a weathered face. He lay flat on a wooden board, eyes closed, his left hand resting on his right arm, occasionally opening his cloudy eyes. Pulling a slumber charm from a silver plaque, she silently chanted, "Crimson," in ancient Hermes. A soothing power swept through the room, and people one by one closed their eyes, falling into sweet dreams. Rui Rui used both her paws to lift a small corner of the blanket, revealing the man's right arm. Where his hand should have been, there was only a gray-blue cloth wrapped around his wrist. The cloth was not clean, and some fresh blood seeped through it. The man did not want others to know about his injury and had covered his severed hand with his sleeve. Rui Rui used her mouth to untie the cloth, looked at the somewhat rotten wound, and pulled a bottle of red potion from the silver plaque, pouring it onto the wound. The moment the red potion was poured, it all flowed towards the wound, gradually fading and finally disappearing upon contact with the wound. The rotten wound began to heal, but it would take some time for the right hand to grow back. The slumber charm Rui Rui used was not very effective, and the lethargy period was relatively short. She waited for a while, and when the man showed faint signs of waking up, she meowed at his ear and then left. Under the crimson moon, the black cat moved nimbly through the city. The black cat stopped, looking at the nighthawk crouching in the bushes beside the apartment. She looked up through the window and saw a sleeping lady. The lady was very beautiful, her delicate appearance easily arousing a desire to protect her. Rui Rui thought for a moment. Since she happened to encounter him, she might as well meet him. Meow. A cat's meow broke the silence of the night. Leonard instinctively turned his head to look, and immediately felt his scalp tingle. That black cat. The black cat might have the strength of a demigod, he couldn't possibly defeat her. Old man, Leonard whispered, do you have any way to get us out of this? Don't worry about it, an old voice sounded in Leonard's mind. Old man, meow. The black cat meowed again, squatting on a tree branch and looking down at him. Leonard involuntarily held his breath, his heartbeat gradually quickening, as he vigilantly stared at the black cat. After a long while, the black cat turned and left, disappearing into the night. Leonard immediately let out a sigh of relief. He carefully walked to the tree branch where the black cat had squatted. The Midnight Poet's excellent physical fitness allowed him to easily climb the tree without touching the branch. The poet hung from the tree, observing the branch with his body pressed low. On the dark brown branch, a tiny, fine tuft of black fur swayed slightly in the crimson moonlight, as if it wanted to merge with the darkness and dissolve into the night at any moment. Leonard's heart filled with joy. He held his breath, fearing he would blow the tuft of fur away, and carefully extended a hand to pinch it. After her nighthawk's shift, Rui Rui continued to stroll through Ting'an City in a good mood. The nighthawk's case should be closed soon. A familiar figure flashed before her. Rui Rui looked at the black-clad girl sneaking down the street. Wasn't that the one the nighthawks were monitoring? A flicker of thought passed through her brown eyes. She quietly followed the girl, watching her easily climb over a wall and sneak into a company, where she pulled out ledgers and quickly began to copy them. This was a building materials company, Rui Rui realized immediately. Eve suspected that someone in the Loan royal family might want to become a Black Emperor. The ritual of the Black Emperor required the construction of 9 mausoleums and large-scale live sacrifices within them, all of which would require a large number of ordinary people. Such a large-scale construction project as building 9 mausoleums would be difficult to completely hide. Not only would it cause a lot of commotion, but it would also require a huge amount of manpower and material resources. The source of manpower should be those who were abducted, and the Rose School of Thought's Temperance faction was jointly investigating this. As for material resources, part of their investigation involved examining some building material companies that might be involved. This lady should be the person investigating this building materials company. However, being monitored by the Nighthawks, the difficulty of the mission had to be raised. Rui Rui jumped into the office and asked in a low voice, "Do you need help, miss?" A talking black cat. Sherman was filled with surprise, but in an instant, she suppressed her astonishment and vigilantly looked at the black cat. "Are you a demoness from the Rose School of Thought?" Rui Rui asked softly again. "I am a member of the Rose School of Thought." Sherman's heart skipped a beat. She pursed her lips, her eyes fixed on the black cat, full of disbelief. She had heard her teacher mention a special existence among the high-ranking members of the Rose School of Thought, not only because she was a cat, but more importantly, because she was deeply favored by the Lord, residing in the Lord's divine kingdom for years, accompanying the Lord's side. She widened her eyes, scrutinizing the black cat before her. Was it really? No way. That esteemed individual rarely participated in the high-level meetings of the Rose School of Thought. Even the high-ranking members of the Rose School of Thought rarely got to see her. And she just happened to meet her like this. Seeing the girl's suspicious gaze, Rui Rui thought for a moment and pulled a badge from her silver plaque. Sherman's eyes widened as she watched Rui Rui slowly pull out the demoness's sacred emblem. Clang! A crisp sound of something falling to the ground echoed. The demoness's sacred emblem was thrown to the ground, bouncing and clattering to Sherman's feet. Sherman stared blankly down at the demoness's sacred emblem at her feet. It seemed, it was a genuine sacred emblem. The girl stiffly crouched down, holding the sacred emblem in both hands, trembling slightly as she looked at Rui Rui in disbelief. Chapter 64, Devout Believer. Do you believe it now? Rui Rui licked her front paws and asked. The young girl's head stiffly swayed left and right twice, like a wind-up robot. How could that esteemed individual possibly throw the Lord's holy emblem on the ground like that? Sherman gradually recovered, tightly clutched the demoness's holy emblem, pressed it close to her heart, and took a deep breath as she asked, her voice very low to avoid being discovered. Looking at her devout demeanor, she must be a member of the Rose School of Thought, and a devout believer at that. Actually, she was a very proper cat at first, and very respectful to Eve, but Eve was just too unreliable. Sure enough, Rui Rui silently rolled her eyes inwardly. Distance creates beauty. Moreover, that esteemed individual resides in the Lord's divine kingdom. How could I easily encounter her? Sherman continued to question, tightly guarding the demoness's holy emblem in her hand, vigilantly staring at the black cat. Rui Rui thought of that small, somewhat messy house and fell silent. After a moment of hesitation, Rui Rui decided to help Eve maintain her image in front of her believer and said, I am indeed not that esteemed individual. I am her descendant. I didn't intend to throw the holy emblem on the ground, I just didn't hold it steady, and it accidentally fell. Sherman stared at Rui Rui suspiciously. Really? Really? Rui Rui said helplessly. I need to confirm first before I can believe you, Sherman said seriously. You tomorrow? I'm not very available these days. Come find me after some time. You'll still be here tomorrow night, right? Rui Rui sighed inwardly. Copying by hand is not only tiring but also slow. Tomorrow night, I'll bring a camera, and we can just take pictures. No, Sherman shook her head. The camera's sound and flash will alert the security personnel, and the words won't be clear in such a dim environment. And if there's anything wrong with the camera you bring, it would be terrible, Sherman silently added in her heart. I have a way to isolate both light and sound within this room. If you're worried, you can bring your own camera, Rui Rui said. It doesn't matter whether you believe me or not, I'm just a kind cat passing by. Tomorrow night, I'll bring a camera, and you can bring one too, but cameras are not cheap. Rui Rui nimbly jumped onto the window, looked back at her, and said, goodbye. Backland, Sherwood Borough. You're back. Eve, wearing a cat-head frilled apron, leaned her hands on the dining table and proudly showed off like a strutting peacock. Look, the Dixie grilled fish I made myself. It's definitely no worse than the Byam restaurants. Rui Rui didn't speak but carefully surveyed the room's layout as if seeing the house for the first time. Eve, not receiving Rui Rui's praise, tilted her head in confusion and looked at her. What's wrong? Your divine kingdom is truly unique, Rui Rui suddenly exclaimed. Eve was utterly bewildered, Her sea blue eyes filled with confusion, and the smile on her lips gradually faded, replaced by a puzzled expression. Eve rubbed her hair with 2 fingers, thought for a moment, and then asked, "Is something wrong with my divine kingdom?" "Nothing." Rui Rui wagged her tail and said lazily, "You said before that you were no worse than Miss Audrey's chef, but now it's a Byam restaurant." "Which Byam restaurant is it?" Eve gestured with her fingers, trying to be vague. "Miss Audrey's house also has more than one chef. Maybe there's one whose cooking is a bit worse." Earl Hall's chefs were all highly paid by the Earl. Not only were they highly skilled in cooking but also good at developing new dishes. Many noble families were like this, with some dishes being exclusive secret recipes. "My cooking skills are also very good. Becoming a chef in a restaurant is no problem at all," Eve said, one hand on her hip and the other pointing at the dishes on the table. Rui Rui squatted in place, quietly looking at her. "What kind of look is that?" All right, Eve raised both hands above her head in a gesture of surrender. "I admit I was boasting," and then she mumbled, "Isn't it normal not to be as good as Miss Audrey's chef?" The next day, Sherman wore a white dress, which made her appear even more delicate and charming. She stood in the shop, listening to the sales assistant introduce various cameras and their prices, her fingers unconsciously rubbing the handle of her handbag, occasionally brushing her hair, trying to maintain a calm expression. It's really expensive. And she was currently unemployed. Even if she gritted her teeth and bought a camera, her living expenses would become a big problem afterwards. "Thank you." Sherman forced a difficult smile. "I need some time to consider and choose a camera that suits me." "All right, miss." The sales assistant showed a standard professional smile, her attitude still humble and polite, making people feel comfortable. "We look forward to your return and wish you a pleasant day." "Goodbye." Sherman nodded to the sales assistant and hurried out of the shop. Her steps were quick, but she still maintained a lady's posture, without any hint of fleeing in a panic. The young girl discreetly glanced behind her. A slender man in a silk top hat was following her, not too far or too close. He seemed to be a novice. His tracking skills were not superb, even clumsy in front of a professional assassin. This was a Nighthawks. Not only was there a Nighthawks behind her, but there were also Nighthawks in the apartment building she rented. For some unknown reason, a group of Nighthawks had rushed to the apartment area she rented early in the morning. Although they weren't there to investigate her, it still made Sherman very anxious. Fortunately, the person tracking her was a novice. It seemed the Nighthawks hadn't discovered yet that she was a member of a secret organization. But they were lingering around the apartment area she rented, and she didn't know how long they would be investigating. If it was for a long time, there was a real possibility of exposure. However, moving would seem too deliberate. Sherman pondered for a moment and decided not to return to Wendell Street in the North District for now. She had always been cautious, never keeping anything that could expose her identity in the apartment she rented. Instead, she hid them in a house on Narcissus Street that she rented under a false identity. She wasn't worried that the Nighthawks would find anything in her house, there was nothing to hide. Since that was the case, it was better to stay away from the Nighthawks to reduce the risk of exposure. Then, she would continue to look for work. She had been looking for work these past few days. Although she would return to Backland after completing her mission, and her savings were enough to support her until she returned to Backland, it would be abnormal not to look for work when unemployed, without an income, and with not many savings. She didn't want to appear abnormal and arouse the Nighthawks' suspicion. Klein followed Sherman, not too far or too close. The captain, Sesama, Leonard, and the newly arrived Scrolls professor, Dana Johnson, were investigating the Black Cat case on Wendell Street in the North District. Fry was on duty at Channy's Gate, and Cohenry was on his routine patrol at the cemetery. In short, everyone had work, so this commission fell to Klein and Luoyao, who were temporarily without work. Dana was sent by the Backland Diocese to temporarily replace Old Neil and arrived the day after Old Neil left. Although it was only a temporary replacement for Old Neil, the Backland Diocese probably had the idea of having him help investigate the Black Cat case. Otherwise, there would be no need to send a Sequence 6. Chapter 65. What a lively scene. 2 pence for lodging, same price day or night. Hearing footsteps enter the inn, the boss leaned back in his wooden chair, his feet propped on the worn-out old wooden table in front of him. His eyes were fixed on a newspaper, and he spoke without lifting his head. Dunn stepped forward and knocked on the table. The boss impatiently raised his head to look at the newcomers, his expression instantly changing. He lowered his feet, stood up, and, in a fawning manner, said ingratiatingly, "Good day, officers, good day, all officers. Is there anything I can do for you? Please come in." The boss subconsciously started to say, "Please come in and sit," but then awkwardly realized there were only 2 old chairs in the entire room, yet 4 officers, the lowest rank having 2 silver stars. None of them were people he could afford to offend. "Have some tea." The inn owner was instantly grateful that he kept some tea leaves at the inn, and there happened to be exactly 4 teacups. The boss bent down to retrieve the keys from a drawer. To prevent the tea leaves from being stolen, he had locked them in a cabinet, and the teacups as well. "No need," one of the middle-aged men with square-rimmed glasses said with a smile. He had the demeanor of a professor, carrying a large, bulging brown leather bag. If not for his inspector's uniform, he would surely have been mistaken for a university professor. "We are here to investigate a theft case. A suspect might have stayed here." "Officer, I am a law-abiding citizen," the inn owner hastily explained. "I did not." "Stop the nonsense," Sesama said sharply. "Take us to search." The boss breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't afraid of the police searching the rooms. After all, those rooms only contained some rotten wooden boards and torn rags, and it wouldn't matter if they were taken. What he feared was an inspection of the guests' identification. Most of the guests this inn accommodated were vagrants, and many didn't have ID. If caught, he would not only face a fine but also potentially the consequence of being shut down. Screech. A grating sound of a door opening rang out. Leonard glanced at the old wooden door, whose age was unknown. It was pitted and scarred, with traces of insect damage and artificial scratches. It was normal for such a place to have insects. In fact, many slightly inferior inns had many bedbugs. Currently, there were no lodgers in the inn. Although this inn only cost 2 pence, it was still a luxury that only a few vagrants could afford, and daytime was for finding work. Those who could afford an inn would choose to stay at night. "We need to search alone," Leonard turned to the boss outside the door and said. Yes, the boss said with an ingratiating smile, respectfully closing the door and leaving. After closing the door, the fawning smile on the inn owner's face instantly vanished, and he muttered a soft curse at the door. Inside the room, Leonard bolted the door and began to pretend to search. The soundproofing in such inn rooms was very poor, people outside could hear the movements inside. Although divination required a quiet environment, as a sequence 6 beander, these sounds did not significantly affect Dana. Dana held the white crystal pendulum, and under the gaze of 4 pairs of eyes, the pendulum gradually began to rotate counterclockwise. Dana shook his head at Dunn and the others, saying, "Let's go to the next room." The dilapidated room door was opened again, and the boss immediately put on his fawning smile and went to greet them, "Officers." The next room, Sesama gestured with his chin towards the room door, looking at the inn owner with authority and saying, "Open it." "Yes." The boss immediately grabbed a string of keys from his waist, quickly ran to the next room, and unlocked the door. "Don't be nervous," Dana said with a smile. His gentle and elegant university professor demeanor made him appear very approachable. "We won't wrongly accuse innocent people." The inn owner scoffed dismissively in his heart, thinking, "Haven't you wrongly accused enough people?" But on his face, he maintained a respectful and fawning expression, repeatedly agreeing and closing the room door. Inside the door, Dana nodded to Dunn and the others, looking at the white crystal pendulum rotating clockwise. He unzipped his leather bag and took out some powder, paper, and a fountain pen. After placing the paper on the door panel, he sprinkled the powder into the air, his mouth moving as he softly chanted a spell. A faint breeze stirred the powder, and Dana picked up the fountain pen, drawing quickly. In a short while, a picture was completed. He blew on the drawing, looked at it twice, then frowned and held it up to face everyone. In the picture, a black cat with 2 paws was holding a bottle of red potion and pouring it onto a guest's severed limb. He frowned, recalling that Klein had also drunk a red potion, which had a wound-healing effect. Could that cat just be kind-hearted? But why had he never heard of it before? Logically, if that black cat could heal people's wounds, it would have long become a kind of urban legend. It shouldn't be like this, with no news at all. Dana folded the drawing and put it into his leather bag, tidying his inspector's uniform. Let's ask that gentleman first, then go to the next room. Seeing the officers come out, the inn owner immediately stood up and went to greet them. Sir, Dana said gently, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Please answer truthfully. Of course, the inn owner rubbed his hands, swallowed, and suppressed his nervousness. Please ask. Was there anything unusual among the guests at the inn last night? Dana asked. Yes. The inn owner immediately nodded. A guest suddenly went mad last night. Suddenly went mad. Leonard's pupils constricted, suppressing the fear in his heart. Dunn and Sesama's expressions hardened. Dana's heart jumped, but he quickly suppressed it. Please elaborate. That gentleman suddenly clutched his hands in the night, shouting and screaming. All his limbs, just like Emperor Rosal said, his hands and feet were dancing. Sesama and Dunn exchanged glances, then asked, what did he shout? Goddess, oh goddess, the inn owner recalled as he spoke. My hand, and something about a miracle. Dana took a deep breath and asked, what happened to his hand? Nothing at all, the inn owner replied. Completely normal. No wounds. It was indeed normal, the inn owner said with some difficulty. But whether there were any wounds, I don't know. My inn accommodates many guests every night, I don't remember such details. In fact, he didn't even remember the guests' appearances or what they did, etc. Many guests never came back after visiting once. We understand. Normalcy was the greatest abnormality. From the image, it could be seen that the lodger was missing his right hand. It seemed that the black cat had indeed healed it. Dunn and the others checked every room before leaving. They also investigated several other places in Ting'an City where the black cat had stayed, but found no useful information. Except for that inn, the remaining information from other places showed the black cat squatting in a corner watching something, or running, appearing to be just passing through, with no useful information. Moreover, there was no discernible pattern to the locations. These are just residual pieces of information. Dana folded the drawing and put it into his large leather bag, glancing at the crimson moon in the sky. They don't represent the whole picture. At least from these images, it seems the black cat hasn't harmed anyone, it even helped people, Leonard said with a yawn. From this perspective, it doesn't seem dangerous. But out of several drawings, only one shows it helping someone. We don't know what it did at the other locations, Dunn said in a deep voice. Currently, we know of 2 people it helped. One is Klein, and the other is that lodger. Following normal procedure, we should investigate him, although I don't think this will yield any useful information. Let's leave this matter to the police, they can search for him. Leonard, you should go back and rest. We will continue the investigation. Beyonders of the sleepless pathway required very little sleep, but they still needed some. Leonard hadn't slept last night and had been running around all day, so he was already yawning constantly. Leonard didn't refuse. After bidding farewell to his captain and the others, he returned to his apartment. Let's go to the next location, Sesama said. Yizitanite Company, Istan Company was a moderately well-known building materials company run by Baron Edgar. Investigating such a company was more troublesome, involving many procedures, and no company wanted to be associated with a case, even if innocent, as it could still cause negative publicity. Therefore, Dunn and the others chose to leave such difficult-to-investigate places for the night, directly sneaking in, which saved both effort and time. How is it? Dunn asked in a low voice. Dana shook his head and handed over the drawing. The image showed a black cat squatting on a window, licking its fur, as if it were truly just an ordinary kitten. Let's go to the next room, Sesama said in a lowered voice. He tapped his teeth, releasing a bluish-purple, translucent, liquid-like spirit. The bluish-purple spirit gradually turned black, and the crimson moonlight passed through its translucent body. It completely blended into the environment. The shape-shifting spirit floated to the window, its body passing directly through the curtains, then floated back to Sesama's side. No one, Sesama received the information feedback from the spirit. He tiptoed to the window, looked left and right, then placed one foot on the windowsill, pushed up with force, and stood entirely on the windowsill. One hand gripped the window frame, and most of his body extended out the window, pressing against the wall. His other hand pushed open the window of the adjacent room. After pushing the window open a small crack, Sesama pressed his finger against the edge of the window and pushed hard. The window slid open naturally, revealing enough space for a person to stand. The three of them nimbly climbed through the window one after another and entered the adjacent room. After they had climbed through, the shape-shifting spirit, its body like liquid, lay limply on the windowsill, cleaning up their shoe prints. This room should be Baron Edgar's office. Not only was it larger than the other rooms, but it also had only one desk, and several paintings hung on the walls. Dana took out the white crystal pendulum and silently chanted 7 times in his heart. The black cat with Beander powers has been here. The black cat with Beander powers has been here. The black cat with Beander powers has been here. Under the gaze of the three, the yellow crystal slowly began to rotate counterclockwise. The three were somewhat disappointed. Just as they were about to switch to another room, a faint sound of footsteps reached them. The footsteps were very light and soft, as if deliberately concealed. There were other infiltrators. Sesama and the 2 others exchanged glances, immediately understanding. Dana immediately pulled out a handful of gray powder and sprinkled it on the 3, and the Nighthawks' figures gradually disappeared into the darkness. The footsteps grew closer and closer, finally stopping below Baron Edgar's office. A faint climbing sound rang out, and a young man climbed in through the window. The excellent night vision of the sleepless pathway Beander fully exposed his appearance to Dunn and Sesama. Ordinary features, black hair, brown eyes, a full forehead, wearing round glasses, and his jacket pockets bulging. The 3 Nighthawks quietly watched the infiltrator. They did not wish for a conflict now, as it would expose them. If he were to do anything illegal, the police would arrest him tomorrow. The young man quickly walked to the sofa, knelt on one knee, and bent down to pull a metal briefcase from under the sofa. He opened the briefcase a very small crack, glanced inside, then quickly closed it again. His movements were very fast, and to avoid exposure, Dunn, Sesama, and Dana were somewhat far from him, unable to see clearly what was inside. The black-haired young man picked up the briefcase, pulled a wad of gold pounds from his jacket pocket, placed them under the sofa, and then stood up. This series of actions made the Nighthawks temporarily suppress their previous deductions. From the black-haired young man's behavior, he might have had an unsavory transaction with Baron Edgar. Dunn and Sesama wanted to follow him to investigate further, but suddenly felt a hand grab their arm, and then a 5 was written on it. In their invisible state, they couldn't see each other, and invisibility only meant visual disappearance. Hearing and touch were unaffected. Therefore, Dana could only use this method to convey information to them, meaning the invisibility effect only had 5 minutes left. After the young man left the office, a white crystal pendulum floated in the air, quietly and steadily suspended. Soon, it began to rotate clockwise, slowly. He's a Beander, Dana's gentle voice sounded, a low sequence. Dunn then said in a low voice, I'll go apprehend him. Sesama lowered his head in thought. He couldn't see Dunn, so he spoke to the air, my spirit will follow you. Thank you. As the words fell, Sesama felt a gust of wind pass in front of him. It must have been Dunn passing by him. Outside Yizidanite Company, Istan Company, Rui Rui's brown eyes watched Baron Edgar's office, then turned and jumped off the branch to find the girl who still didn't know what was happening. Sherman, as usual, quietly snuck to the office building. Just as she was about to climb the wall, she heard a rustling sound from the bushes. Was she discovered? Sherman was startled and immediately looked at the bush. A black cat emerged from it. She whispered, "Don't speak, hide." Sherman didn't know what was happening. After a second of thought, she squatted down and hid in the bushes with the black cat. Chapter 66 Official Beander. In the darkness, Linnerwusi held a metal briefcase, looked around twice, and after ensuring no one was present, quietly left the office building, escaping the area under the cover of night and bushes. Before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, he suddenly saw a police officer in uniform appear in the distance behind him. Linnerwusi's expression tightened, and he immediately stopped, turning to run towards a single-story optical shop. He carried the metal briefcase with both hands, and with a sudden burst of strength in his arms, he threw the briefcase onto the shop's roof. Linnerwusi reached out, just about to grab the wall to climb onto the roof when he heard a gruff voice. "Hey, you over there." The rough-looking, fierce police officer spotted Linnerwusi, immediately ran over, waving his baton, and demanded, "What are you doing?" Linnerwusi immediately retracted his hand, instead gripping his glasses, applying a slight force, and discreetly crushing the lenses under the cover of his palm. "First, get rid of this annoying guy, then come back for the materials." He took off his broken glasses, handed them to the police officer, and quickly said, "Officer, please, you must help me. When I bought these glasses here, the owner told me that if they broke within a year, I could come to the shop for repairs, but now they are refusing to help me fix them with all sorts of excuses. I have no choice but to." Thump, thump, thump. The rough-looking man fiercely struck a lamppost with his baton, sternly shouting, "I don't care what your reason is. Now, get back to where you belong. But, get back," the rough man roared, waving his baton. "Yes, officer." A flicker of cunning flashed in Linnerwusi's eyes as he turned his back to the police officer, about to leave. Bang! A sharp pain shot through the back of his head, as if he had been struck heavily by a weapon, the impact causing him to clench his teeth involuntarily. Sherman huddled, trying to minimize her presence. She had witnessed a man carrying a briefcase run out of the office building across the street, suddenly stop in the middle of the road, and then fall down with a bang. "What happened to him?" Sherman asked in a low whisper. "He was knocked out by an official Beander who was in an invisible state," Rui Rui said. Sherman's body stiffened. An official Beander. That was close. If it weren't for the black cat, she might have fallen into the hands of an official Beander tonight. Sherman quietly stroked the black cat's back. The soft fur gave her a sense of security. Rui Rui looked at the unusually nervous Sherman, stood up, placed her two front paws on the girl's knees, and licked her hand to comfort her. "Don't worry," Rui Rui said, "he won't find us, meow. He is a nightmare, a Beander of the sleepless pathway. Their hearing is extremely sensitive at night. With the noise you just made, normally, you would have been heard long ago." Sherman immediately covered her mouth. She looked at the black cat in front of her, her eyes moving. She slowly lowered her hand from her mouth and softly asked, "So, is this an abnormal situation now? Did you do it?" Rui Rui nodded. Sherman felt a little relieved. This black cat must be a powerful Beander cat. She quietly hid in the bushes, observing the situation on the street. Soon, a middle-aged man in a police uniform appeared on the street. The official Beander handcuffed the man lying on the ground, waited for a while, and then two more men in police uniforms ran out. They exchanged a few quiet words and then carried the unconscious man away. After the official Beander's back was completely out of sight, Sherman quietly breathed a sigh of relief and softly asked, "There shouldn't be any more official Beanders, right?" "No," Rui Rui said. "Let's go in, meow." "Thank you," Sherman said softly. "You're welcome." Rui Rui licked her front paw, saying, "It's just like raising a hand, just that much effort, meow." Sherman was momentarily stunned. "Do you also read Emperor Rosel's collection of famous sayings? A kitten that is not only a powerful Beander cat but also knows Emperor Rosel's famous sayings, how amazing." It felt like humans were inferior to cats. Rui Rui was silent for a moment, then said, "You should go up quickly." Sherman nodded, slowly stood up, and agilely and lightly climbed into her destination. She took out the ledger she hadn't finished copying last time and looked back at the black cat. Didn't you bring a camera? Sherman looked at Rui Rui, whose neck only had an off-white cotton collar, and asked with confusion. If the black cat were to bring a camera, it would likely be by holding it in her mouth or hanging the camera strap around her neck. She could also carry a bag on her body and put the camera in it, but the black cat's small size meant she couldn't wear a bag large enough for a camera. Current cameras are all large and heavy, and some are difficult to operate, requiring professional photography knowledge. Rui Rui lowered her head and pulled a large camera out of her silver medal. She squatted on the window, holding the camera strap in her mouth, the camera hanging naturally, only a few centimeters from the ground. Sherman gasped. She had thought the collar was just a decoration, never expecting it to be a Beander item. The girl bent down and took the camera from Rui Rui's mouth, examining it in her hands for a while. This seems to be a point-and-shoot camera. Sherman had just been to a camera shop and still remembered the cameras the salesperson introduced to her. At the time, she was quite fond of this point-and-shoot camera. Point-and-shoot camera was just its nickname because operating it didn't require professional photography knowledge. When this camera was launched, the company's advertisement was, "A camera even a fool can use," hence it was called a point-and-shoot camera. She quietly breathed a sigh of relief, glad it wasn't one of those complex cameras that required professional photography knowledge. Sherman was examining the camera in her hand when suddenly the crimson in her field of vision gradually faded. She looked up and was shocked to find that the entire room was surrounded by darkness flowing like water. That seemingly materialized darkness isolated the room from the outside like a cage. "Shoot," Rui Rui said, pulling 2 candles out of her silver medal and placing them next to the ledger. Okay. Sherman suddenly snapped back to reality, picked up the camera, and was about to press the shutter, only for the pitch black in the lens to make her realize. She awkwardly put down the camera, picked up a candle, and pinched the wick with 2 fingers. Whoosh! The orange-red flame, ignited by spirituality, lit the candle. Rui Rui's candle had a base, allowing it to stand easily on the table. After lighting both candles, Sherman used the candlelight to clearly see the contents of the ledger through the lens. Click, click. The sound of the shutter constantly rang out, and with each flash, the task progress soared like a rocket. "Done," Sherman said to Rui Rui after restoring everything in the office to its original state. "Let's go to the next room." Click, 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 click. After taking the last photo, Sherman held the camera and said to the black cat, "Thank you. My name is Sherman. What's your name?" "Sherman," Rui Rui said. "Are you Mickey Jones's student?" "Meow." The girl was stunned for a moment. "You know my teacher." "Sort of," Rui Rui said, licking her front paw. Eve would remember the names of all Rose School of Thought members and make her remember them too. According to her, this was the wisdom of a leader. But she wasn't a leader, she was just a cat. Thanks to a certain despicable demoness, although Rui Rui hadn't met many Rose School of Thought members, she knew most of their names. "The one sleeping in the room, is that Mickey's mirror illusion?" "Is she in Tingen?" "Meow." Rui Rui asked. "It is indeed teacher's illusion, but she is not in Tingen right now," Sherman replied. "That's actually a mirror. I usually hide it under my pillow, and at night, after getting into bed, I use the covers to conceal it, quietly move it onto the bed, and then sneak out myself." "Actually, you don't need to explain in such detail." "Meow," Rui Rui said, with a tone somewhat like an elder instructing a junior. "In the Beander world, you still need to be more vigilant." Sherman nodded and said, "I know, but I choose to trust you." "But yesterday you didn't believe me. Yesterday, you suddenly appeared and said you wanted to help me. Of course I didn't believe you. Actually, when you showed the holy emblem, I believed half of it. If your attitude had been more devout, I would have believed you on the spot." Saying this, Sherman even gave Rui Rui a reproachful look, silently expressing her dissatisfaction. "Today you saved me again, so of course I believe you." "Okay," Rui Rui said, "my name is Rui Rui." "Meow." "Rui Rui." Sherman frowned. That's the name of the Crimson Moon cat. Rui Rui was a little surprised. Many Evernight Goddess believers didn't know about the Crimson Moon cat, yet this devout follower of Eve knew. Both my parents are devout believers of the Evernight Goddess. They pray before dinner every night. My literacy textbook was The Revelation of Night, and my only reading material was also The Revelation of Night. Sherman saw surprise on the cat's face. She explained, and past memories didn't seem so pleasant. A trace of sadness flashed in the girl's eyes. I used to believe in the Evernight Goddess too. But now, Sherman paused, then said firmly, I only believe in the Lord, and I am only loyal to the Rose School of Thought. Why? Rui Rui asked casually, sighing inwardly that the Rose School of Thought's ideological work was quite effective. The Rose School of Thought turned me back into a woman and gave me a new life, Sherman replied with firm eyes. A flicker of understanding passed through Rui Rui's eyes. The Rose School of Thought did not advocate men taking the demoness pathway, but it would help men who wanted to become women to take the demoness pathway, and these members were often very devout. Sherman's lips curved slightly, and she said in a sweet voice, I always felt that I should be a lady, but unfortunately, I was born a man. My family never understood me, and everyone around me, except for one friend, discriminated against me. In the past, I would always sit in a tavern, hoping that a gentleman would express his affection for me. I didn't even dare to think about dating, just an expression of affection would have been enough. Until I met teacher. She said she could help me become a woman. Oh, my goodness, do you know how happy I was? Sherman seemed to return to the day she met Mickey. She clutched the camera tightly, an uncontrollable smile on her face, and turned around for Rui Rui. Look, I really became a lady, and a beautiful one at that. Only after becoming a woman did I feel truly alive. No discrimination, no ridicule. I don't have to sit in a tavern smiling at every man who walks in. Things I never dared to imagine before have become reality. I've had relationships with 2 gentlemen, and they both treat me very well. We're about to get engaged. Wait, Rui Rui was stunned for a moment. 2 gentlemen, meow. Sherman was also stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted, hastily waving her hands to explain, no, you misunderstood. One of them is my ex-boyfriend, and the other is my current boyfriend. Rui Rui nodded, indicating she understood. You're not afraid to mention that you used to be a man, meow. This is good. In the Beyonder world, accepting oneself is a good thing, as it can effectively reduce the likelihood of losing control. I used to be unwilling to mention it, Sherman said. But now I don't tell just anyone. I've only told my sisters in the Rose School of Thought, and I've also met an older sister who is just like me. I'm telling you because you have the demoness holy emblem, are the descendant of that esteemed individual, know my teacher, and have helped me. Speaking of which, since you are the descendant of that esteemed individual, why do you use the name, Rui Rui? Sherman asked. It seemed she truly believed Rui Rui now. How would I know? You need to ask my ancestor. Shouldn't it be mom or dad? Sherman asked, puzzled. Usually, parents are the ones who name children. That's just a metaphor, meow, Rui Rui said. Sherman remembered that Emperor Rosal had also referred to his daughter as little ancestor, and she probably understood Rui Rui's meaning, sighing, you two have such a good relationship. It's all right. Rui Rui removed the darkness that isolated the room, jumped onto the window, and looked back at Sherman, saying, after you develop the photos, put the camera and a mirror with a demoness symbol drawn on it together, meow. Then you'll be able to take the camera away. Sherman asked. Rui Rui nodded. Then can I contact you this way in the future, by placing a letter next to the mirror? Yes. Okay, Sherman said, shaking the camera, thank you. You need to be quick. Huh, okay. Blackthorn Security Company. Hiss. So painful. Linnerwusi felt a throbbing pain in the back of his head. He gasped, enduring the pain, and laboriously opened his eyes. It was an unfamiliar place. 3 police officers sat before him, but this place didn't look like a police station at all. Officer, Linnerwusi tried to reach for the back of his head but found his hands cuffed with a pair of silver handcuffs. His expression tightened. I haven't done anything illegal. Why am I being arrested? Why were you sneaking into Yizidanite Company, Istanate Company, late at night? Dun asked calmly. I lost something important at Yizidanite Company, Istanate Company, I was just looking for it, Linurwusi said, his tone somewhat urgent, as if he truly were an innocent person who had been wronged. He was certain that no one had discovered him when he infiltrated the company. The place where he might have been exposed was probably that police officer, who might have seen him running out of Yizidanite Company, Istanate Company. Sesama glanced at Dana, who immediately understood and placed a metal briefcase on the table in front of them. Linurwusi suppressed the surprise in his heart, feigning calmness as he looked at them. Chapter 67, Deception. Dana opened the briefcase, turned it towards Linurwusi, and after 3 seconds, closed it, placing a stack of gold pounds next to the metal briefcase. You privately conducted Beander material transactions with Baron Edgar. After scrutinizing him for 2 seconds and seeing that Linurwusi still had no intention of admitting it, Dun said in a deep voice, no need to quibble, no need to deny. Linurwusi's expression was a little grim. He didn't know why he had been exposed, but now he had to find a way to escape. We will investigate you and decide on a course of action, Dun said, his deep gray eyes fixed on the young man opposite him. If you haven't done anything illegal, you can become our informant, which is the best outcome. Of course, if you have, you might have to spend some time in prison, and in the most serious case. He paused, then looked at Linurwusi. Seeing his face grow even grimmer, Dun let out a light chuckle. Perhaps you know. Linurwusi did indeed know. Becoming a sealed artifact tester was the most serious consequence, basically equivalent to a death sentence, no, even more terrifying than a death sentence. He thought of what he had done in the past and secretly gritted his teeth. He absolutely couldn't be discovered. I am a Beander working for Baron Edgar, Linurwusi took a deep breath and said in a low voice. That Beander material was my reward from Baron Edgar. Because the church doesn't allow Beander material transactions, we used this method. As a spectator, Linurwusi was well versed in communication techniques. Through intimidation and rhetoric, they apply psychological pressure to their targets, causing them to confess without being directly asked. In reality, they might not know much, or even nothing at all. Many nobles know about Beyonders, and there are quite a few Beyonders among them. Unless they are old nobles who have lost their wealth, even if they don't become Beyonders themselves, they will hire Beyonders to protect them. Although Baron Edgar is a new noble, he has been in aristocratic circles for many years and is very wealthy, so it is not surprising that he can become a Beyonder and hire Beyonders. Although the Beyonders hired by nobles mostly come from the church, there are also cases of hiring wild Beyonders. As long as they can pass the church's inspection and are not openly displayed, the church can turn a blind eye. Linurwusi always used a fake identity when committing crimes in the past, making it somewhat difficult to thoroughly investigate him. As long as he could make them believe he was an hired Beander, they would be much more lax in their investigation, and he would have a chance to survive. Dana and Sesama exchanged glances. This explanation was indeed plausible. Name, and how did you meet Baron Edgar? Dana held a pen in one hand and continued to ask, why did he hire you? Linurwusi, my name is Linurwusi. I once worked in an industry under the Baron, and was appreciated by the Baron for my abilities and character. Linurwusi paused, then continued, then the Baron discovered I was a Beander and hired me as his bodyguard. After Dana wrote down Linurwusi's words in his notebook, he asked, are you a wild Beander? Not exactly. Dana's writing hand paused, then he started writing again rapidly. Sesama and Dun's expressions immediately tensed as they stared at Linurwusi. A hint of cunning flashed in Linurwusi's eyes. After all, I work for Baron Edgar. The three immediately relaxed. Dun frowned and asked, have you joined any secret organizations? From the time I became a Beander until now, I have often been alone. My formulas, my materials, my potions, I've had to find ways to obtain them myself, Linurwusi said. Gentlemen, if I had joined a secret organization, would I still need to endure fear and work for a noble just for a material? Why wouldn't I get it through the organization? Wouldn't that be safer? Dana truthfully recorded every word Linnerwusi spoke. Have you committed any illegal or criminal acts? Of course I have, Linnerwusi scoffed. I once ambushed a detestable policeman on his way home and gave him some small gifts from his window. What small gifts? Oh, gentlemen, it's a pity you didn't see it. Linnerwusi curled his lips, as if recalling something amusing. I personally saw him screaming as he was drenched by foot-washing water falling from the sky. The foot-washing water was still hot. Is that why you're going to lock me up? Dunn was silent for a moment. This should be considered assaulting an officer, and although illegal, the circumstances were not severe, it was more like a prank. Dana asked a few more questions, and Linnerwusi answered each one. The answers seemed fine. Sesama said, we will conduct an investigation on you. If we find that you have concealed anything or lied, the punishment will be doubled. Now, you have one last chance. Gentlemen, I have not lied. Linnerwusi said, his expression unchanged. Sesama stared at him for a moment and then said, we understand, but you will need to be held inside Channy's gate until the investigation is complete. No problem, sir. I hope you finish the investigation quickly. Linnerwusi showed a slight smile. Perhaps due to his facial features, his upturned lips always gave people a mocking feeling. Can I write letters during my detention? What kind of letters? Sesama asked. I've discussed some business collaborations with several gentlemen and ladies. In this situation, I'll probably be missing for many days, so to prevent unnecessary losses, I must terminate those collaborations with them. Linnerwusi had been planning a scam and was about to close the net. Grisis was about to invest, and there were many more people, but now he had to give up and quickly get out of here. Only after Mei Gao Oc truly became pregnant with the true creator's child did Linnerwusi calm down. He understood that he would be the first to die after the divine child was born, so he began to prepare to escape Tingen. According to his original plan, he would first get the materials from Baron Edgar, then close the net, and with the money, he could leave Tingen. He didn't expect to run directly into official Beyonders. He secretly cursed his bad luck. You were hired by Baron Edgar and still have time to discuss business collaborations. Sesama said. Of course, Linnerwusi replied, I have plenty of free time, why wouldn't I use that time to do some business? You can, but the letters must be inspected by us and can only be delivered by us. That's certainly no problem, Linnerwusi said with a calm and indifferent attitude, as long as the letters reach those people. Also, I hope you can return my glasses, Linnerwusi said, thank you. The lenses are broken. If you are released, we will compensate you for your loss after your release. The next day, Blackthorn Security Company. Good morning, Klein. Roseanne's sweet voice rang out, with a hint of small curiosity and excitement in her tone. Good morning, miss, Klein replied. You seem quite excited. Roseanne looked left and right. Although there was no one around, she still tiptoed over to Klein, lifted her skirt, lowered her voice, and whispered, last night, Captain and the others caught a wild meander. Miss, Klein said with a wry smile, we're just discussing the company's daily affairs, not a spy rendezvous. Speaking of which, didn't Captain and the others go to deal with Rui Rui's matter last night? And they even managed to bring back a wild meander along the way. No, Roseanne shook her head firmly. I don't want Captain to find out I'm not working seriously again. Can you go and see? Roseanne asked expectantly. See that wild meander, then tell me what he's like and why he was caught. You're very curious? Klein asked. Yes, Roseanne said with a smile, this is the first wild meander caught since I started working here. After speaking, she walked back dejectedly. Too bad, I still have to work. Otherwise I would definitely go see for myself. Klein nodded, all right, I understand. Where is that wild meander? Behind Channy's gate, Captain is guarding him inside. Roseanne looked up, her eyes sparkling, and replied. Always so energetic, Klein thought to himself, adjusting his top hat and walking towards Channy's gate. Walking through the deep, quiet corridor and stairs, Klein arrived at Channy's gate, pushed the door open, and entered the room where the wild Beander was being held. Klein looked behind Channy's gate. The captain and a black-haired young man were sitting on chairs. The black-haired young man, wearing silver handcuffs, was leisurely reading a newspaper. He must be the wild Beander, Mr. Linnerwusi. The captain, on the other hand, was doing nothing but sitting and guarding the wild Beander. Captain, Klein greeted Dunn, good morning. Linnerwusi saw a black-haired young man walk in, put down his newspaper, and said to Klein, good morning, Nighthawk. Klein was momentarily stunned, but out of politeness, he immediately returned the greeting. Good morning. Dunn turned his head and replied, Roseanne sent you, didn't she? Klein nodded, then shook his head, actually, I wanted to understand a bit myself. Dunn briefly explained what happened last night to Klein. Klein sighed inwardly, Mr. Linnerwusi's luck was truly terrible. Here are the interrogation records from last night for Linnerwusi. Would you like to take a look? Dunn asked. As he spoke, Dunn took a notebook from a drawer and handed it to Klein. Klein took the notebook, thanked him, and began to flip through it. Hey! A soft chuckle suddenly sounded in Klein's ear. Old sister. Do you think there's anything wrong with the interrogation records? Eve's voice echoed in Klein's mind. Klein read it carefully, but couldn't find anything wrong. Read it again, Eve said. Klein flipped through it again and suddenly realized that on some questions, Linnerwusi hadn't actually answered directly, or had said a lot after a direct answer. He read it again, assuming it was false, and found that Linnerwusi's answers were highly misleading and ambiguous. These answers would all be subject to divination, which meant that lying was not possible. But only half the truth is not the truth. Klein had seen some rhetorical techniques online before, where people would mislead others by only telling half the story or answering beside the point, guiding the other person's thoughts, and thus deceiving them without actually lying. Klein opened his mouth, wanting to tell the captain about this suspicious point, but suddenly thought, Captain and the others are experienced official beyonders, why didn't they notice it? Is it that, spectator, again? Captain, Klein, good morning, Leonard said as he walked in. He still looked like a romantic poet, the top two buttons of his shirt always undone. Is this the wild Beander, Mr. Linnerwusi? Linnerwusi nodded indifferently and said, good morning, Nighthawk. Leonard, like Klein, was momentarily stunned. This wild Beander seemed not at all afraid or nervous. Ah, good morning. Although a bit surprised, Leonard replied out of politeness. Klein, what are you holding? Leonard asked, looking at the notebook in Klein's hand. Klein handed the notebook to Leonard and said, this gentleman's interrogation records. Leonard took the notebook and began to flip through it. Klein kept observing his expression. As he flipped, his expression remained normal, then he suddenly tilted his head, cocking his ear as if listening to something. Leonard's action was too obvious, Klein thought to himself. Anyone who knew would immediately realize he was listening to an existence speak. This time, Leonard's listening period was quite long, suggesting that the angel said quite a lot. How did it reverse? Shouldn't old sister be the one who talks a lot, and that angel talks very little? The last time Klein interacted with the existence within Leonard, he felt that he wasn't a very talkative person, at least not like old sister. Did their souls swap? Klein silently thought to himself, though he knew this was impossible. The poet's face suddenly changed, then he immediately reined in the abnormality on his face. Unfortunately, this scene was witnessed by Klein, Dunn, and Linnerwusi. The poet's acting isn't very good, Klein thought to himself. He quietly glanced at Linnerwusi behind him. The wild Beander showed no abnormal behavior. I hope it truly is so. Klein stepped forward and asked, Leonard, are you unwell? Leonard immediately nodded, my stomach suddenly cramped just now. It might be because I didn't eat dinner last night and didn't have breakfast this morning. Then you should go rest for a bit and eat your breakfast, Dunn said with a frown. You need to take care of your body and eat on time, otherwise you'll get stomach problems. Emperor Rosal once said, stomach pain isn't a disease, but when it hurts, it's deadly. Quote, I understand, Captain. Chapter 68, A Great Existence. Klein and Leonard entered the lounge. Leonard immediately sat on the sofa, lowered his head, and urged in a low voice, old man, hurry up and think of a solution." Klein frowned. He felt that things were not as simple as he had imagined. Leonard also knew about the spectator behind them, so his current reaction seemed a bit excessive. "What happened?" Klein leaned closer to Leonard and immediately asked, "Leonard." Leonard opened his mouth and whispered, "Klein, do you know that the wild Beander gentleman was actually lying, misleading us?" Klein nodded. "Klein, you've just started your job, so you probably haven't encountered it yet," Leonard said in a low voice, his head down. "When we interrogate, we usually enter dreams to check. People can't control their actions in dreams, so everything they say is true, and the gentleman's situation wouldn't exist." "No, I have encountered it," Klein retorted in his heart, "and the interrogated subject was myself." "So, Captain and the others didn't enter the dream?" Klein thought for a moment and tentatively asked, "Not just because of the spectators' reason?" Leonard looked up at Klein in surprise. "How do you know? Did that existence tell you?" "Poet classmate." Klein didn't know what to say for a moment. He felt that Leonard's intelligence was like old sisters, sometimes reliable, sometimes not. Leonard just asked casually. Without waiting for Klein's answer, he continued, "The old man said that Captain and the others didn't enter the dream to check, and there was another reason besides the spectator. It was their spiritual intuition protecting Captain and the others, telling them not to check." Klein's brown eyes widened slightly. What secret did Linnerwusi have? What's wrong with that gentleman? Klein asked with a frown. Leonard stared at Klein, his lips moved twice, and he whispered, "He has the divinity of a great existence within him." The divinity of a great existence. Klein gasped in his heart. Although he didn't know what divinity specifically was, he could tell from the name that anything related to a god couldn't be simple. Klein paused, looked at Leonard, and was about to ask what would happen if Linnerwusi had the divinity of a great existence within him, when he heard a familiar voice in his mind. He might become a vessel for a divine descent. Old sister. Divine descent vessel. Klein was stunned for a moment, subconsciously clenching his cane and pursing his lips. It can't be what I'm thinking, right? A deity might descend upon Tingen through Linnerwusi. That's right, the gentle female voice continued as if reading his mind. Deities can inject their consciousness into other people through certain rituals or items. Those injected with divinity will gradually become vessels for the deity's divine descent. Currently, Linnerwusi doesn't know that there's a hidden consciousness within him, which means the divinity's erosion of him isn't severe. Klein's palms broke out in a cold sweat. He gripped the silver-inlaid cane in his hand tightly and looked up at Leonard. "We must find a way to tell Captain about this and report it to the Holy Cathedral," Klein immediately said. "And," Klein paused, "that spectator doesn't seem to want Linnerwusi to be exposed, or at least, doesn't want Linnerwusi to be exposed to the Nighthawks. They might be cooperating, or perhaps the spectator secretly used Linnerwusi for something." He took a deep breath and continued, "Perhaps this matter is related to the divinity within Linnerwusi. Of course, this is just a guess. But since they don't want the Nighthawks to discover it, we must investigate thoroughly." Leonard used his waist strength to immediately sit up, his expression serious, his mind rapidly working. "We definitely can't tell Captain and the others directly. Perhaps we can find a way to hint at Linnerwusi's danger, so Captain sends him to the Backland Archdiocese or the Holy Cathedral for examination. But then Linnerwusi might escape or be rescued," Klein said with a frown, pointing out the drawback of the problem. "Merely hinting at the danger, this matter will be severely underestimated by Captain and the others, far from receiving the attention it deserves. If we explicitly tell Captain that Linnerwusi has divinity within him, then we also risk exposure. The hidden existence should have their own forces and might try to rescue Linnerwusi. Moreover, they must take this operation very seriously, and the forces they deploy will not be weak. Even if Sir Sesama and Captain escort him, it might not be enough to stop them. Then what should we do?" Leonard rubbed his hair. "Linnerwusi." Leonard suddenly paused, a hint of doubt and thought flashing in his beautiful dark green eyes. He hesitantly asked, "Do you think Lin'er knows about the consciousness of the great existence within him?" "Lin'er doesn't know," Klein said. Old sister had already told him about this. Snap. Leonard snapped his fingers. He stood up, supporting himself with one hand on the sofa, and walked closer to Klein. What would his reaction be if he knew? Klein was stunned for a moment, then felt that this seemed feasible. If Lin'er didn't want to die, he would inevitably reveal this to the Nighthawks, perhaps by lying and concealing some things, but this matter would definitely be hinted at. However, he also felt it was too risky, not stable enough. What if Lin'er was a fanatical believer of that great existence and, even after knowing, was still willing to become a vessel for a divine descent? "It's too risky," Klein said. "We can't ensure that Lin'er's reaction after knowing will be what we want, and it might also expose us." At the last sentence, Klein secretly glanced at the holy emblem of Evernight on the wall, then quickly retracted his gaze. This was already the second time. Klein felt a little guilty and silently praised the goddess in his heart. "It's okay, we'll disguise ourselves so he doesn't recognize us," Leonard said with a smile. "If Lin'er's reaction isn't good, we'll erase his memory." "Erase memory? How to erase memory?" "Beat him until he gets amnesia." Klein almost laughed at his own thought, quickly pulled back his wandering mind, and asked, "How to erase memory?" "The old man can." Leonard patted his own head. "I just found out. Ever since the existence behind you gave the old man a Beander characteristic, his condition has improved a lot." Klein nodded. Leonard saw that Klein had no doubts about the Beander characteristic and chuckled, "It seems the existence behind you is good to you." Then he leaned closer to Klein, his eyes full of curiosity, and whispered, "What exactly is your relationship with that existence?" "I don't know either." Klein wanted to roll his eyes, expressing his dissatisfaction that old sister had thrown this problem at him, but that action was truly ungentlemanly. He would only do it to old sister. In front of others, he still had to maintain a gentlemanly image, so he gave up. "What about you?" Klein retorted. "Ah." Leonard rubbed his hair. "I don't seem to have any relationship with the old man." After speaking, Leonard lowered his head and began to ponder. Could that existence and the old man be in the same situation? But she didn't seem weak. Although he still didn't know Klein's relationship with that existence, Leonard didn't ask again. Perhaps he, like himself, was inexplicably sought out by a mysterious existence. Speaking of which, Klein and he were quite similar. Leonard curved his lips and extended a hand to Klein, saying, "It seems we are both protagonists of the era." "So Chunabu," Klein complained in his heart, but still extended a hand and shook Leonard's hand. Leonard, with one hand clasped with Klein's, leaned forward, patted Klein's shoulder, and whispered, "See you tonight." Eve led Klein into her storeroom. Klein looked at the storeroom in surprise. Second epic, third epic, fourth epic. The words on the slips were all written in giant language. After teaching Klein about Beander potions and secret organizations, Eve began to teach Klein giant language, Elvish, and ancient Hermes. With the bonus from the seer potion, Klein learned very quickly, so he could understand everything. "These." Klein tightened his grip on his cane and asked in disbelief, "Are these all real?" "What's real?" Eve was rummaging through a large box labeled, "Fourth Epic, Clothes," and without lifting her head, she asked when she heard Klein's words. "Are these all really antiques?" Klein took a deep breath and asked. "Yes," Eve said. Klein's expression immediately became animated. He stood rooted to the spot, not daring to move, fearing that he might accidentally break something and then be unable to afford to compensate even if he sold himself. "If you want to look, then look. Don't worry about breaking them," Eve said, taking out a half-silver mask with golden patterns from the box and placing it on the table. Klein then carefully examined the room, curiously looking at the antiques. When he first entered, he saw the bookshelves that could make historians faint with excitement, and he immediately walked over quickly. There were only 3 bookshelves, from the 3rd epic to the 5th epic, with no 2nd epic or 1st epic. Klein briefly glanced at the 5th epic bookshelf and skipped over it. Many of the books on it were Rosel's works, and most of them were circulated on the market. Next, he came to the fourth epic bookshelf, randomly pulled out a few books, and flipped through them. Many were novels, and there were some popular science books, but no history books, which made Klein a little disappointed. Many of the books on the third epic bookshelf were also novels, but what was noteworthy was the empty entire top layer of the third epic bookshelf. The other two bookshelves also had empty spaces, but they were all on the bottom. As for the bookshelves, Eve had organized them quite meticulously, by author. Judging from the arrangement of the books, she should have placed them from top to bottom. Why were the books on the top layer of the third epic bookshelf gone? Klein thought for a moment but didn't ask. These were all Eve's memories. Whatever the reason, they probably weren't very good memories. He walked into the large boxes, opening them one by one. Some were stacked very high, and Eve thoughtfully moved them to the ground with spider silk. Klein found that this was truly a storage room. Although the items here were priceless antiques, it was still a storage room, not a collection room. The items were placed very casually, and many of the antiques were ordinary items. Only a few were obviously valuable items, such as the tarot cards of Emperor Rosel. Klein was stunned for a moment when he saw these tarot cards. It seemed old sister truly stored these items here as ordinary daily items. No, perhaps for her, they truly were daily items. Klein caressed the slip of paper that read, Ouroboros and Medici, thinking with a somewhat heavy heart. He remembered old sister telling him that Ouroboros was her family, so what about this, Medici, whose name was placed with Ouroboros's? Klein also saw many unfamiliar names here: Amen, Adam, Ammonizes, Michael, Truncest. He realized for the first time that she had lived in this world for thousands of years. Found it, Eve found a black long cloak from another large box. She turned to Klein and saw him looking at the slips of paper with names. She pondered for a moment and said, "Don't say these names after you go out, especially this one." Eve ran to Klein's side and pointed at the slip of paper that read, Adam, saying, "This one, you can't even think about it. As long as you mention his name in your heart, he can immediately sense it. So don't think about it. If you can't do it, I can tamper with your memory." Klein hesitated for a moment, swallowed it back, and then said, "Please tamper with it." "All right, I'll put a small curse on you," Eve said. She extended a hand and touched Klein's glabella, saying, "Done." Klein tried to recall, but could only remember that such an existence existed, but couldn't recall the name. "Will this curse cause me any harm? What is the way to lift it?" Klein asked. Based on his experience with novels and movies from his previous life, curses were generally harmful and had methods to break them. The harm is that it makes you forget this name. As for the method to break it, it's for me to touch your glabella. Klein nodded. It seemed that the Beyonder abilities of high-sequence Beyonders evolved to be almost omnipotent but still had to follow the most basic rules. Even the curse of a king of angels would still have a way to be broken, it's just that if she didn't help, it would be impossible to break. As for the harm, truthfully, this wasn't really harm. Being forced to forget a part of one's memory, if one didn't look at the cause and effect, it truly seemed like harm. Wait, is the standard for judging harm not based on facts, but on old sister's will? As long as old sister believes this is harm in her heart, then it is harm. But there should be limits, right? Klein told Eve his guess. Eve smiled after hearing it. Not bad, little brother, very smart. It seems so, Klein thought to himself. High-sequence Beyonders are truly terrifying. Do you want to look again? Eve asked, hanging the black cloak over her arm and picking up the mask from the table. Klein shook his head, then paused and asked, "Can I take some books out?" "You can," Eve said. "Many of those books are popular novels." Klein nodded, indicating that he knew. He quickly walked to the fourth epic bookshelf, pulled out a few books, hugged them, and then quickly walked back. Chapter 69 Sincerity. How about trying it on? Eve shook the black cloak she held and handed it to Klein. Klein put on the cloak. The black cloak was white and long, covering him completely, with only his feet in leather shoes visible. He examined himself in the full-length mirror, pondering. I should change my shoes too, to avoid being recognized. Try this too, Eve said, holding up a mask. Klein glanced at it. This mask only covers the upper half of my face. He pointed at the mask and said, don't you have anything else? And this is too ornate, Klein complained. I'm not going to a ball. It's fine, Eve said with a grin, reaching out to Klein and immediately placing the mask on his face. Her empty hand, fingers spread, faced him. With a flick of her wrist, a tiny silver needle appeared between two fingers, with a black thread attached to it. Can't we just sew up the bottom of the hood to cover the lower half of your face? Saying this, Eve immediately grabbed Klein's hood with her other hand, pinching the needle and guiding the black thread through the fabric. Wait, Klein immediately reached out a hand to cover Eve's wrist. Don't you think this look is too ungentlemanly? It's very different from your usual image, isn't it? Klein's obstruction didn't bother Eve at all. She said, still pinching the needle and sewing, isn't this great? If no one knew, who would think it was you? I'm helping you here. Klein choked a bit. Although what Eve said made some sense, it sounded more like sophistry than logic. I don't believe you only have this one way to help me disguise myself, Klein said expressionlessly. Of course there are others, Eve teased, looking at Klein's face. Do you want to know? No. Seeing Eve's expression, Klein knew that the so-called other methods would definitely be a trap, and immediately refused. I don't want to know. What a pity, Eve sighed, looking up, then showed a mischievous smile. Just kidding, I insist on telling you. Cross-dressing, 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 Eve's mouth moved rapidly, Loan words quickly popping out. Let's wear skirts together, Zhou Mingrui, ha ha ha. Even your gender would be changed, this disguise effect would definitely be great. Trust my skills, I guarantee you won't be recognized. And you can even choose the style. Whether it's pure and cute, or enchanting and alluring, whether it's a sweet girl or a mature woman, I can disguise you as all of them. Don't just think about it, act now, don't. Klein slapped Eve on the forehead with one hand, gently pushing her away from him. It seems you're very good at makeup. Huh. Eve paused, then snorted twice. I'm a professional makeup artist, the kind with 20 years of experience. I remember you're a reporter now, Klein asked curiously. What other jobs have you done? Teacher, flower farmer, beast tamer, doctor, detective, farmer, bodyguard. Eve counted on her fingers. Many. Klein couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. In some aspects, old sister truly made people envious. He would probably be a nighthawk his entire life. But being a nighthawk was already very good. The work was easy, the salary was generous, and there were no downsides except for the danger. He was very willing to be a nighthawk for life. Eve continued sewing with the silver needle, her hands and mouth never stopping. I don't usually wear makeup. Do you think I would wear makeup? Klein shook his head. His old sister was a peerless lazy person who would never stand if she could sit, and never sit if she could lie down. If it weren't for going out, Klein believed Eve's wardrobe would only contain pajamas, and her shoe rack only slippers. Eve recalled, when I was a makeup artist, I did makeup for many rich young masters and ladies, and nobles. In the early 5th epoch, nobles pursued fair skin, and both men and women would apply thick powder to their faces. They were indeed very fair. I probably wouldn't be as fair as them even 10 days after dying. All right, Eve said, pulling on the hood. Let's go tonight. I'll be watching you. Klein nodded and walked towards the mirror. Slap. He looked back at Eve in confusion. Eve suddenly placed her hand on Klein's shoulder. Seeing him look back, she patted it again, took a deep breath, and asked, Are you really not going to do it? Huh. Klein looked at her in confusion. We can bring Ouroboros, and then take a picture together. I've already thought of a name for the photo, 3 Sisters. How about it? Klein took a deep breath, tried to hold back, but couldn't. I wish you would leave my sight. All right. Eve quickly ran past Klein and plunged into the full-length mirror. Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard lowered his head, cocking his ear as if listening to something. He glanced at Lin'er next to him and quickly walked out of Channy's gate. For tonight's operation, he had voluntarily taken on the task of guarding Lin'er and Channy's gate tonight. Outside the door, Leonard was startled when he saw the newcomer. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but immediately swallowed it back. The person in front of him wore a wide black cloak, a very common disguise. But he wore a silver half-mask carved with golden forget-me-not patterns, and above the mask, he wore sunglasses, making him exceptionally conspicuous. The lower part of the hood was sewn up, and it was sewn crookedly, like an ugly centipede crawling on the lower part of the hood, using its legs to grab the sides of the hood and pull it closed. The newcomer raised a hand and removed the sunglasses from his face, revealing a pair of brown eyes, then shifted the mask downwards. It really is Klein, Leonard thought with some surprise. The disguise is very successful. Klein pointed at Leonard's clothes, signaling him to quickly put on his disguise. Leonard was confused for 2 seconds before realizing. He took out the cloak and mask he had hidden in the Blackthorn Security Company beforehand. Compared to Klein's flashy mask, Leonard's mask was much simpler, a plain white mask that covered his entire face, without any patterns or designs. Klein looked at Leonard's exposed eyes, then pulled out a pair of sunglasses from his cloak pocket and handed them to him. One had green eyes, the other brown, and among the Nighthawks, there just happened to be one with green eyes and one with brown eyes, which was quite thought-provoking. Leonard took the sunglasses, looked at them for a moment, and then put them on. He pointed at the door, turned to Klein, and seeing him nod, took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Channy's gate was gently pushed open. Leonard moved very carefully, making no sound. They walked to Lin'er side and looked down at Lin'er sleeping on the makeshift bed. Lin'er body was tense, his eyes tightly closed, feigning sleep, wondering what these two people who had inexplicably snuck in were going to do. Klein squatted down and shook Lin'er, but Lin'er showed no reaction. He shook him again, this time with much more force than before. Lin'er rolled over, lying flat on the makeshift bed, letting out a discontented snort, seemingly annoyed at being disturbed from his sleep, then slowly opened his eyes. "Who are you?" Upon seeing the two people in front of him, Lin'er immediately scrambled backward twice, staring at them with a look of terror. He shouted loudly, seemingly wanting to attract the Nighthawk on duty, and then felt a chill on his neck. A military knife was pressed against his throat. Lin'er swallowed, and the moment his Adam's apple protruded, his flesh lightly pressed against the blade, creating a faint sensation. "Don't make a sound," Leonard said in a low, deliberately altered voice, which now sounded somewhat like an old man. "We mean no harm, provided you cooperate." Lin'er gaze shifted downwards, looking at the military knife glinting coldly in the warm light of the gas lamp. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, finally nodding with an extremely subtle movement. "Damn it, where did these two come from?" Lin'er felt incredibly unlucky. While maintaining his outward fear, he pondered in his mind why these two people had come and whether it would be beneficial or detrimental to him. "In fact, we're here to help you," Klein chuckled softly, lowering his voice and deliberately altering it to sound very different from his true voice. Lin'er looked at them with a puzzled expression, but a hint of interest stirred within him. "You performed a mysterious ritual, didn't you?" "A ritual concerning a deity," Klein stated with certainty. Lin'er suppressed his instinctive reaction, maintaining his outward panic, and whispered, "Sir, all rituals are related to deities." Klein sneered, saying, "You know which one I'm talking about." As he spoke, Leonard's hand, holding the dagger, tightened slightly, and the blade of the military knife advanced towards Lin'er flesh. A faint pain appeared on his neck. If the other party exerted more force, he would likely bleed. As an experienced Beander, Lin'er clearly knew how dangerous it was for blood to fall into someone else's hands in the Beander world. "If you cannot show enough sincerity, then we cannot offer enough sincerity," Klein said softly. Lin'er expression was somewhat grim. A trickster had no powerful offensive means, and their physical attributes were far inferior to pathways skilled in combat. Judging by the black-clad man's movement of pressing the dagger against his throat, facing him head-on, he would find it very difficult to escape, let alone with a military knife at his throat now. His life was now in the hands of these two people. Yes, Lin'er took a deep breath and said, that ritual is related to my fiancé. More sincerity requires the two sirs to exchange it with sincerity, Lin'er said, looking at the two. He was no longer feigning terror, his lips slightly curled as if mocking others. Even in this predicament, he would not allow himself to be manipulated. Inside you, Klein paused, then continued, there is the divinity of a great existence. Lin'er scoffed, looking at the two mockingly. Sir, of course I know. In fact, this is the reward I received for completing the ritual. Leonard was startled, but thankfully the cloak and mask concealed his abnormality. He immediately suppressed the surprise in his heart, not allowing Lin'er to notice anything unusual. Klein hadn't expected him to know that he possessed divinity. He immediately suppressed the surprise in his heart, sneered, and continued, then do you know what will happen to you, possessing the divinity of a great existence? Lin'er froze, staring intently at the two people in front of him. You will become a vessel for a divine descent, Klein slowly began, speaking softly, his tone eerie as if telling a story. But his words, blending with the dim surroundings, created a sense of eeriness. The divinity will slowly erode you, and as the divinity erodes, the consciousness of the great existence will gradually awaken within you. Hey, Klein chuckled softly, what do you think will happen to you then? Chapter 70, A Show of Acting. Lin'er breathing hitched, a chill rising from his back, and a surge of survival instinct flooded his mind. He curled his fingers, his thumb slightly bent, its tip resting on his index finger's joint. Just as he was about to lightly pinch it twice, he felt the blade on his neck shift. The cold touch gently brushed, seemingly urging Lin'er. Lin'er froze for a moment, subconsciously retracting his fingers. How can you prove what you're saying is true? I haven't felt the true Creator's consciousness. You can wait until the true Creator's consciousness awakens, then you'll know if it's true or false. Oh, and by then, we won't be able to save you either. Klein chuckled, gaining the truth always comes with a price, doesn't it? He looked at the two men in black before him and deliberated, that ritual was told to me by a member of the Aurora Order. His name is Sirius Orepus. The Aurora Order. Klein recalled his previous lessons. The Aurora Order was an organization that appeared 100 or 200 years ago, worshipping the true Creator. If that's the case, the divinity within Lin'er is very likely the true Creator's divinity. As he spoke, Lin'er looked up at the two, observing them. The wide black cloaks enveloped both, preventing Lin'er from gleaning any useful information. However, their attire was too distinctive, especially the person wearing the silver half-mask. Analyzing his personality was quite simple. He should usually be quite flamboyant but very calm. The exquisite mask, adorned with golden patterns, was clearly expensive, indicating he was a wealthy individual. Carelessly displaying his characteristics to others showed great confidence in his abilities. The person holding the saber was much more normal in comparison. The sunglasses seemed to be something the other person had asked him to wear. Wealthy individuals are not uncommon, but not plentiful. Such flamboyant and distinctive wealthy individuals are even rarer, making it not difficult to investigate. The two individuals in front of him watched in silence, seemingly waiting for him to continue. Lin'er collected his thoughts and continued, the content of the ritual was to make Megao conceive a spawn of evil god of the true Creator. Klein and Leonard were startled, not expecting it to involve a divine child. Your sincerity is not enough, Klein said in a deep voice, one must be sincere with friends, it's polite, sir. Lin'er had not mentioned many details of the matter. I am a new member of the Aurora Order, inducted by Sirius, which is why Sirius told me about the ritual. I was misled by him, wanting to obtain a reward from a god, and so I prepared and completed the ritual. Lin'er paused, wanting to ease his stiff body, but the saber at his neck prevented him from moving easily. After the ritual was prepared, Hood Eugen hypnotized Megao, making her mistake the true Creator's phantom for me, and she conceived a spawn of evil God of the true Creator. I believe my sincerity is already sufficient. Lin'er stared intently at the two men and said, "So, sirs, where is your politeness? How will you save me?" "Not enough." The black-clad man, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke in an aged voice. "Megao Oc is just an ordinary person. Normally, she should have died during the ritual. This is indeed a low probability event, but its probability is not zero. This event simply happened," Lin'er said with a grim expression. If it hadn't succeeded, he wouldn't be in this predicament. He thought of his subsequent miraculously good luck, then laughed self-deprecatingly. "Perhaps the success of that ritual used up all my good luck, which is why I've been so unlucky ever since." Klein remained silent for 2 seconds before opening his mouth and saying, "You tell this matter to the Nighthawks on duty. They will send you to the Holy Cathedral, and we will rescue you on the way." To solve Lin'er's problem, he must be sent to the Holy Cathedral, but if Lin'er proactively suggests it, telling the Nighthawks that he has the true Creator's divinity within him, then this matter will receive sufficient attention. At that time, the Holy Cathedral will send people to take Lin'er away, and given Lin'er's personality, he would never betray the only people who could possibly save him. This way, it would neither expose his and Leonard's secret nor ensure that the Lin'er incident receives full attention. "What about the divinity then?" Lin'er immediately asked. "How will the divinity within me be dealt with?" "You'll know then." "Sir, if you don't tell me," Lin'er said, "it's hard for me to trust you." Klein scoffed with a hoarse voice, "You don't have to believe." Lin'er's pupils contracted. Just as he was about to say something, he felt the cold touch on his neck disappear. The man in black retracted the saber. The two infiltrators ignored Lin'er and left the Chinese gate one after another. After closing the door, Klein pulled out a small, circular mirror, only half the size of his palm, from his pocket. Klein had used this mirror to sneak into Blackthorn Security Company. Otherwise, with his current skills, he would have difficulty even leaving his apartment door. He reached out and tugged at Leonard's cloak, then held up the mirror in his hand. Leonard thought for 2 seconds, then understood, taking off all his disguises and handing them to Klein. Leaving these items at Blackthorn Security Company risked them being discovered. As he took the saber, Klein's hand paused, surprised that Leonard actually had this. He took the saber and observed it carefully. In his previous life, Klein had browsed some information about sabers online. It was said that the blade of a real saber was usually gray, black, brown, or other colors, and would not shine brightly for concealment. However, Leonard's saber had a bright silver blade that reflected light under the gas lamp. Klein had not encountered sabers from this world and did not know what they were like. He had only heard some of his classmates discuss them at university. The more famous sabers in this world were Fulsac sabers and Highland sabers. The Fulsac kingdom worshipped the god of combat, and its people were brave and skilled in battle. Their weapons were always excellent, and their sabers were especially renowned worldwide for their quality. The fame of Highland sabers, however, was rather unique. It was said that their saber blades were made of gold, which left a deep impression on Klein. But even if it were true, a gold saber should probably just be a collector's item in the style of a saber. Klein collected his thoughts, holding Leonard's items in one hand, and with the other, he extended his index finger, tapped the mirror surface twice, then pressed his fingertip firmly against the mirror. A huge suction force emanated from the mirror surface, as if a person stood behind the calm, smooth mirror, wanting to pull him into the mirror world. Klein relaxed his body, allowing the suction to pull him. The resistance at his fingertip suddenly vanished. Klein did not retract his hand in time. His hand hung in the air of his room, while he stood within the mirror image of the room. If someone were to enter this room, they would only see a floating hand. As long as Klein took one step forward, he could return to the real world, Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard, holding a cup of coffee, walked in after the Chinese gate. "Good evening," Leonard, seeing Lin'er sitting up, greeted him with some surprise. "Why are you awake?" Lin'er looked at the Nighthawk with the poet-like demeanor, took a deep breath, suppressed the panic in his heart, and nodded, yes. Mr. Mitchell, Linnerwusi asked, where did you just go? I took care of some personal hygiene issues, Leonard expressed vaguely. Linnerwusi nodded, pulled up the covers, and lay back down as if nothing had happened. Leonard secretly observed Linnerwusi while sipping his coffee. If Linnerwusi didn't tell him about the divinity within him before sunrise, the old man would erase his memory, and he and Klein would start with Mei Gao Oc, using the spawn of evil god ritual to expose Linnerwusi. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, Linnerwusi suddenly sat up, gasping for breath, as if he had been startled by something. Sir, Linnerwusi stumbled to his feet, rushed towards Leonard, and said with a face full of terror, please save me. Leonard was stunned for a moment and immediately asked, what happened? True Creator. Linnerwusi's eyes widened, and he shrieked in terror, his consciousness is inside me. Chapter 71, The Missing Mei Gao Oc. Clang. Leonard Mitchell quickly stood up, his movements so rushed that the chair beneath him instantly toppled over as he rose. He tightly gripped Linnerwusi's shoulders, steadying the panicked man, and sternly said, we will save you, we will save you. Don't panic yet. Tell us what happened. The true Creator's consciousness. Linnerwusi clutched Leonard Mitchell's arm like a drowning man grasping a lifeline. Leonard Mitchell felt a sharp pain in his arm. If Linnerwusi had squeezed any harder, his sleeve and arm probably would have been scratched. Linnerwusi shrieked, I can feel it. He's awakening inside me, he's eroding my consciousness. I'm going to die. Leonard Mitchell looked at Linnerwusi, who was in a state of disarray from fear, and silently commented in his mind, good acting. His real pathway couldn't be, actor, could it? Among the 22 divine pathways, there is no, actor, pathway, an aged voice echoed in Leonard Mitchell's mind. Old man, you can actually hear my thoughts. Leonard Mitchell protested mentally, my last bit of privacy is gone. Wait, does that mean I can talk to you in my mind now? I wasn't listening to your thoughts, Pales said. Do I need to listen to your thoughts? Leonard Mitchell was somewhat suspicious, but unfortunately, he had to deal with Linnerwusi now and didn't have much time to converse with Pales. He maintained a serious expression as he looked at Linnerwusi. Just now, I sensed his presence again. I sensed it once before, sir, you know, I woke up because of him, I was startled awake from a dream. But at the time, I didn't realize it. After falling asleep, I felt his presence again, and this time I finally realized it, Linnerwusi said, his voice trembling. Due to panic, his words were a bit jumbled, but he still clearly conveyed his meaning. Leonard Mitchell tried hard to maintain a shocked expression, immediately grabbed Linnerwusi, and led him out of Channy's gate. They ran all the way, rushing to the telegraph machine. Leonard Mitchell sat in front of the telegraph machine, his fingers tapping rhythmically on it, sending out a series of clicks. While sending the telegram, he frequently observed Linnerwusi, as if fearing he might undergo a mutation. Leonard Mitchell sent 2 telegrams, one to Dunn, as the captain of the Nighthawks team. Dunn had a telegraph machine at home for easy contact. The other was sent to the church, instructing the clergy on duty at the church to immediately notify Sesama to come to Blackthorn Security Company. After sending the telegrams, Leonard Mitchell quickly returned to behind Channy's gate with Linnerwusi. The lowest level of Channy's gate contained many sealed artifacts. If an accident truly occurred, they could use the favorable environment to resist. After returning to Channy's gate, perhaps out of caution, Leonard Mitchell put an additional handcuff on him. Linnerwusi sat in the chair with his head bowed. He had calmed down now, no longer as panicked as before, but still filled with fear. Leonard Mitchell also sat in a chair, staring intently at Linnerwusi, so he could detect any changes in him at the first sign. The two waited anxiously. After a long while, a hurried footsteps sounded, and Leonard Mitchell immediately stood up and looked towards Channy's gate. What happened, Leonard? Dunn immediately asked as he pushed open the door. Captain, Lord Sesama. Leonard Mitchell exclaimed in surprise, you've finally arrived. Sir. Linnerwusi immediately stood up, rushed towards Dunn and Sesama, and tightly gripped Dunn's arm, saying, you must save me. Dun frowned, and calmly asked, what happened? Linnerwusi immediately recounted everything in detail, and Leonard Mitchell listened attentively from the side, very satisfied with Linnerwusi's rare sincerity. As Linnerwusi's words fell, Dun and Sesama both looked solemn, remaining silent. For a moment, it was unusually quiet behind Channy's gate. I'll send a telegram to the Sacred Hall, Dun said, immediately running to the telegraph machine. Immediately after, a series of beep boop da sounds entered their ears. After a while, the sounds disappeared. Dun pushed open the door and said to Sesama and Leonard Mitchell, the Sacred Hall will send someone to transfer Linnerwusi and Mei Gao Oc to the Sacred Hall. During this time, the Sacred Hall hopes we can try our best to control Mei Gao Oc and Linnerwusi. The Aurora Order might try to abduct them. There's no need to imprison Mei Gao Oc, just ensure she doesn't fall into the Aurora Order's hands. Done. Sesama took a deep breath, forcing down the shock in his heart, and said, you and Leonard Mitchell take the sealed artifacts and immediately go to Mei Gao Oc's house to control her. I'll stay here and guard him. Mei Gao Oc had only been pregnant for a few days, the fetus had not yet fully formed. Even if it was a spawn of evil god, it should be very difficult for it to cause a significant impact on the outside world. However, the true creator's consciousness within Linnerwusi already showed signs of awakening, and the destructive power of an evil god was certainly stronger than an unborn spawn of evil god. Although both were very dangerous tasks, the spawn of evil god was relatively safer. Dun frowned, seemingly disagreeing, but still nodded in agreement. Be careful, Dun said to Sesama in a deep voice. Sesama nodded and said, I know. Dun and Leonard Mitchell arrived at Mei Gao Oc's residence according to the address provided by Linnerwusi. Leonard Mitchell took a deep breath and knocked on the door of the apartment. Who is it? A female voice came from inside the door, likely the hired maid. Leonard Mitchell took out his identification and said, Inspector. The door quietly opened a crack, and Leonard Mitchell passed his identification through the gap. After a while, a series of hurried footsteps sounded, moving further and further away from them. It must have been the maid leaving. Leonard Mitchell and Dun heard a few doors opening and sounds of conversation. The maid must have called the owner of the house. The sound of a door opening rang out, and Leonard Mitchell saw an ordinary-looking lady open the door. After seeing Leonard Mitchell, she respectfully returned his identification to him. Officer, a middle-aged man said somewhat nervously, is there something wrong? Miss Mei Gao Oc is involved in a theft case. Dun showed his identification and said, she needs to come with us to the police station. Covert surveillance or other methods could easily alert the spawn of evil god in Mei Gao Oc's womb. They decided to first try to control Mei Gao Oc as police officers, under the guise of investigating a case. My daughter couldn't possibly steal, the middle-aged man immediately stated definitively, and her mental state has been very poor recently. We've even started considering finding a psychiatrist for her. We also believe in Miss Mei Gao Oc's character. In fact, we are not looking for Miss Mei Gao Oc because we suspect her of participating in the theft, but rather because we suspect she has had contact with the thief, Dun said. So she needs to undergo questioning, and as an important witness, she will also need to undergo further questioning and protection. Further questioning. And why does she need protection? It's just a theft case. Will Mei Gao Oc be in danger? A noblewoman who looked to be in her 30s asked worriedly. Yes, madam, Leonard Mitchell nodded. The amount involved in this case is very large, so it needs extra attention, and the thief may have violent tendencies. To prevent him from harming the witness, we need to protect Miss Mei Gao Oc. Oh, my goodness. The noblewoman shrieked, and hurriedly said to the maid, Quick, Annie, quickly call Mei Gao Oc down. Annie nodded hurriedly, and rushed upstairs to the second floor. Officers, I beg you, please protect. Oh no, madam. Annie's scream suddenly came from upstairs, the young lady is gone. Chapter 72. Of course, it's because it feels good. No. 2 Narcissus Street. Klein opened his eyes, lying on the bed and looking up at the clock. 10:30. As expected, if he stayed up late, he couldn't get up. Klein thought drowsily, wanting to go back to sleep. After quickly tidying himself up, he took a public carriage straight to Blackthorn Security Company. Miss Roseanne, Klein entered Blackthorn Security Company and immediately felt a heavy atmosphere. His heart tightened a bit, his intuition told him that things might not be going so smoothly. Did something happen? Even Miss Roseanne, the usually vibrant receptionist, had her head lowered, looking worried. Ah, Klein. Roseanne, still looking down, quietly told Klein everything in detail. Mei Gao Oc is missing. However, there's still good news. Roseanne forced a smile, seemingly trying to cheer up. The people from the Holy Cathedral will arrive tomorrow morning, and Miss Mei Gao Oc might have left on her own and didn't fall into the hands of the Aurora Order. Klein nodded, and Roseanne continued, Miss Mei Gao Oc's family has already reported her missing to the police. Because this matter is very special, a case was opened last night, and the police will also help us search for Miss Mei Gao Oc's whereabouts. Additionally, the Nighthawks forces will now prioritize the Spawn of Evil God incident. Therefore, the Antigonus family notebook incident and the Black Cat incident will have their allocated forces reduced, Roseanne discreetly observed Klein, as both cases were related to him. The Antigonus family notebook incident will be your responsibility. The Black Cat incident is currently less dangerous and will be handled by Mr. Dana, but if needed, the Nighthawks will not hesitate to provide support. Klein nodded and said, I understand. Did the captain say anything else? Ah. Roseanne paused for a moment, then said, also, the captain hopes that while you're looking for clues regarding the Antigonus family notebook, you can also pay attention to any clues about Miss Mei Gao Oc or the Aurora Order. I understand. Where are the captain and the others? The captain and His Excellency Sesama went to apprehend Hood Eugen and Sirius Orepus. Fry and Luo Yao are guarding Linerwusi and Channy's gate. Leonard went home to rest and will probably be back in the afternoon. The others went to look for clues. Then I should also get moving, Klein said, straightening his top hat. Goodbye, Miss Roseanne. Goodbye. Roseanne looked at Klein, her hands clasped tightly, and said worriedly, you all must be careful. We will. After Klein left Blackthorn Security Company, he didn't immediately go looking for clues. Instead, he took a public carriage back to No. 2 Narcissus Street. He suspected that the spectator was interfering behind this incident. That spectator had a very high Beander sequence, making it impossible to divine using ordinary methods, but old sister should be able to divine Miss Mei Gao Oc's whereabouts. After several days of exploration and experimentation, even Klein had figured out many uses for Saphira Castle. For example, it could enhance divination abilities. Also, in Saphira Castle, Klein could directly transmit sounds to people with whom he had established a connection, and it could also allow Klein to receive sacrifices. Unfortunately, because his sequence was still too low, he couldn't open the door of sacrifice, so this use was temporarily useless. Although Klein could also chant Eve's honorific name, discussing it in Saphira Castle was safer. Klein entered the washroom, took 4 counterclockwise steps, and ascended to Saphira Castle. He sat on the bronze chair and said to Eve's Crimson Star, come to Saphira Castle quickly. 3 seconds later, Klein felt Eve's knock and immediately opened the door for her. What is it? What is it? Eve yawned, complaining with deep resentment, disturbing my sweet dreams so early in the morning. Miss Mei Gao Oc is missing, Klein said directly. Eve had been watching him all last night, so she knew who Mei Gao Oc was. Ah. I know, Eve said nonchalantly. Did you think I stopped watching after you went offline? Don't worry, nothing will happen. Eve leaned lazily on the bronze chair and said, old sister doesn't have much, and there isn't much I can give you, but there are 2 things I am certain I can give you and will definitely give you. One is a ladder, and the other is a safety net. With my net catching you, nothing will happen. Klein was momentarily stunned. For some reason, he suddenly thought of that storage room and the names on those boxes. He raised his hand and pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking off the random thoughts in his head, and forced a smile, saying, it's a good thing you're not a celebrity, otherwise another famous quote would be ruined by a transmigrator. In fact, Rosal already said that phrase a long time ago, Eve said, spreading her hands. And my phrase is miles apart from the original. Did you call me up here in such a hurry because you wanted to ask something? Eve asked, bringing the conversation back on track. Can you divine Mei Gao Osis location? Klein immediately asked. Yes, I can. Eve ran her hand through her messy long hair, but Mei Gao Osi is moving, and the guy behind it won't let you meet. Let me give you a few more hints. A few strands of Eve's hair got tangled together. She reached out a hand to pinch the hair to prevent hurting herself. The growth patterns of ordinary creatures cannot be applied to mythical creatures. Although Mei Gao Osi has only been pregnant for a few days, she already looks 3 or 4 months along. Also, if the spawn of evil god senses danger, it might invade the host mother even more to accelerate its own growth. Also, have I told you? It seems I haven't, Eve said. The guy behind it covets something of the Nighthawks. That thing is behind Channy's gate. Also, Linnerwusi's ritual succeeded partly due to his help, but Linnerwusi doesn't know this. Klein was startled and immediately tried to connect the clues. Coveting the item behind Channy's gate, but Channy's gate is always guarded by Nighthawks. There are 2 ways to get the item after entering Channy's gate, one is by cunning, the other is by force. And he helped Linnerwusi complete the ritual, indirectly causing the spawn of evil god and evil god consciousness incident. Now Linnerwusi is staying behind Channy's gate, but Linnerwusi doesn't know that someone secretly helped him, which rules out the possibility of their cooperation. If Linnerwusi doesn't know, then Mei Gao Osi is even less likely to know. From this incident, it seems he is preparing for a forceful attack, which is why he tried to prevent His Excellency Sesama from entering Tingen. But the people from the Holy Cathedral are about to arrive in Tingen, and then his plan will fall apart. Mei Gao Osi is missing. Wait, could it be that he plans to launch an attack before the Holy Cathedral personnel arrive? Currently, Blackthorn Security Company only has 2 Nighthawks, which is not enough to resist the spawn of evil god. Klein suddenly stood up. Don't worry, it won't be that fast, Eve said leisurely. Although the growth of mythical creatures is very unscientific, it still needs time to grow. The remaining time is not enough for the spawn of evil god to be fully born. An unborn spawn of evil god poses less threat. To ensure the fighting power of the spawn of evil god, he should have Mei Gao Osi visit Blackthorn Security Company in the evening or at night, giving the spawn of evil god as much growth time as possible. Klein's hanging heart eased a little, and he complained with gallows humor, can you just say it directly? Isn't it better this way? Why do you always have to be a riddle person? It was meant as a joke, but to his surprise, Eve looked at Klein with a serious expression. 2 reasons, Eve extended 2 fingers and said in a serious tone, first, under excessive protection, you won't go far on the Beander path. So, many times, I will only give you hints, you have to walk your own path. Second, Eve paused, looking up at Klein. Klein was startled, immediately feeling a little nervous, holding his breath as he looked at Eve on the bronze chair. She slowly opened her mouth, then burst out laughing. Of course, it's because it feels good. Ha 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 ha. Klein's mind went blank, staring blankly at Eve, who was laughing so hard below. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his terrible mood. Sure enough, he shouldn't have held out hope for this guy. Are there any other questions? Eve stretched and said, if not, I'll be leaving. Yes, if the spawn of evil god cannot be born, Klein said, tapping the armrest and frowning, then we'll have to deal with Miss Mei Gao Oc, won't we? The smile in Eve's sea blue eyes did not diminish. The moment she became pregnant with the spawn of evil god, she could no longer be considered alive. As things stand, Mei Gao Oc has become half a discarded piece. The success rate of this matter is very low. In fact, if he had pulled the Aurora order into it, there might have been a chance, but unfortunately, he didn't want to. Quote. Klein was silent for a moment, then opened his mouth and asked, have you ever thought about dealing with the spectator? A little interested, but that's all. Eve leaned against the backrest and looked up at Klein. If you want to deal with him, I will help you. Anything else? Klein lowered his gaze to Eve and gently shook his head. All right then, Eve stood up. Goodbye. After Eve left Saphira Castle, she immediately collapsed onto her bed. She turned her head to look at herself in the mirror, then suddenly sat up. I should go out for a walk. The city of generosity, Biam, always seems so lively. The shouts of vendors are endless, and the unique scent of the sea fills the city. A blonde young lady in a blue cloak, with a golden retriever at her feet and a black cat in her arms, walked elegantly down the street. The beautiful young girl, with a pair of emerald eyes as captivating as jewels, curiously observed her surroundings. This was Audrey's first time traveling so far alone, without her family, which was a very novel experience for her, with a unique sense of excitement. Rui Rui, Audrey reached out and stroked the black cat's soft fur. You're truly amazing. Meow, meow. A fair hand pinched the back of the black cat's neck, lifting it from Audrey's arms. Rui Rui. Audrey heard Rui Rui's cry, then felt her arms empty, and immediately turned to look at the newcomer. Miss Eve. Seeing who it was, Audrey paused, then felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. Her beautiful eyes sparkled with curiosity as she observed Eve carefully, as if trying to see what made her different from others. Before coming, Rui Rui had already told her that this ability of rapid travel was called Travel, a Beander ability only possessed by a Sequence 5 apprentice. To give such a powerful Beander item to her pet, Miss Eve must be a very powerful Beander. I wonder what pathway Miss Eve is on. How did she get from Backland to Biam? Was it also through travel? Is Miss Eve a Beander of the apprentice pathway? Or does Miss Eve also have a Beander item like Rui Rui? Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. Eve pinched Rui Rui's ear and looked up at the beautiful young girl in front of her. Would you like to have breakfast together? Breakfast. Audrey was startled for a moment, then reacted and said with a smile, sure. Has Miss Audrey been to Biam before? Audrey shook her head slightly and said, no. Then let me be Miss Audrey's guide, Eve chuckled. The first place to introduce, of course, is Biam's famous dress restaurant, known for its unique cuisine from the Rhodes Islands, and deeply loved by travelers. Rhodes Islands cuisine likes to use a lot of spices and has a strong flavor. What do you think, Miss Audrey? I think that's wonderful, Audrey said with a smile on her lips in anticipation. I can't wait to try it. Then let's go now. Eve placed Rui Rui on the ground and said with a smile, otherwise, I might starve to death on the way to Dress Restaurant. Eve took Audrey to Dress Restaurant. This restaurant specialized in Rhodes Island's features, with decorations mostly golden ornaments in the southern continent style, though whether they were real gold was hard to say. However, the overall architectural style of the restaurant leaned more towards LotM, an elegant European-style building, with sunlight streaming through large glass windows into the interior. Neatly arranged tables and chairs, comfortable sofas, and exquisite wooden wine cabinets were all in place. Through the glass cabinet doors, one could clearly see the precious wines and red wines displayed inside, but Dress Restaurant's main offerings were not those luxury items on display. Rui Rui, you and Susie stay outside. Eve stroked the black cat's head and said, you must protect Susie well. Meow. After bidding farewell to the two young ladies, Eve and Audrey entered the restaurant. Led by a waiter to their table, Eve took the menu, ordered a few dishes, and then handed it to Audrey. Miss Audrey, take a look, Eve said. It's my treat. Audrey was surprised for a moment, took the menu, and looked at Eve. Haha, after all, Miss Audrey treated me to so many delicious desserts. If I don't do something for Miss Audrey, my conscience wouldn't be at ease, Eve said sincerely, please give me a chance, Miss Audrey. Then, Audrey thought for a moment. Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Eve. Audrey took the menu, read through it carefully, hesitated for a while, and finally ordered only one Dixie grilled fish, a bottle of red wine, and a cheese steak. Eve chuckled after seeing her order. Miss Audrey, don't worry, this restaurant's prices aren't high. I can still afford it. Audrey looked towards the sound and saw Eve smiling at her. The spectator's ability could only interpret that she seemed to be in a good mood, and there was no dissatisfaction from feeling underestimated. The young girl breathed a sigh of relief. She just didn't want to trouble Miss Eve too much. Audrey smiled and said, "These are enough." The waiter wrote down each dish and was about to leave when Eve called him back. "Another Dixie grilled fish, not spicy, for takeout." "Yes, miss." After the waiter left, Eve and Audrey sat facing each other. She propped her chin with one hand and asked, "Has Miss Audrey ever been to the southern continent?" "Several times," Audrey recalled. "I once traveled to the southern continent with my family." "I used to travel with my family too," Eve said with a smile. That was truly a happy time. Although she hadn't known Eve for long, through numerous conversations, visits, and continuous correspondence, Audrey had a good understanding of Eve's situation. She looked at Eve and suddenly remembered that Eve had lived alone in Backland for over a decade, and no one had seen her family during those years. Audrey pursed her lips and hesitated, then opened her mouth, trying to change the subject. "Both my history and geography teachers taught me about the southern continent, and I consider myself knowledgeable about it, but there are some questions I've never understood." "What questions?" Eve followed Audrey's lead and asked. "The traditional beliefs of the southern continent are death and chaos demonis. Death is a unique belief of the southern continent, while the belief in chaos demonis also exists in the northern continent. In fact, before Emperor Rosal's war, followers of chaos demonis had the right to openly preach in the Loan Kingdom. Why does the belief in chaos demonis appear simultaneously in both the southern and northern continents?" "Perhaps the southern and northern continents were connected before the fifth epoch," Eve said. Audrey nodded, then raised a point of doubt. "Perhaps, but the followers of chaos demonis should have known about the existence of the southern and northern continents. Logically, they should have been able to discover shipping routes earlier than Emperor Rosal." "Perhaps there was no need," Eve replied with a smile. "Anything else? We can discuss it together. Although we might not get an answer, debate itself is an interesting activity, isn't it?" Audrey nodded. She looked up slightly, thought for a moment, and said, "Many high-ranking officials who served during Emperor Rosal's era mentioned in their memoirs that Emperor Rosal proposed a colonization strategy as soon as he arrived in the southern continent, but he never implemented it throughout his life and even destroyed related documents in his later years. Does Miss Eve think this is true?" "Probably true. I also think it's true, but," Audrey tilted her head slightly, a hint of confusion in her eyes. "Why did Emperor Rosal regret it later?" "Who knows," Eve smiled and said, "but it's a good thing, isn't it? I apologize for not updating for so many days. I haven't dropped it, I'm just experiencing writer's block. I have many scenes in my head, but I don't know how to connect them, so I plan to take a break for a while. Everyone, please stop following for now. Don't subscribe. I'm really worried if I can even finish it. Those who have auto-subscribe on, please turn it off. Come back when it reaches 500,000 words. Don't worry, this book won't die just because no one is subscribing." Audrey paused, then nodded. "You truly are a good child," Eve said, hooking her lips into a smile. Audrey shook her head, opened her mouth as if to say something, hesitated, then closed it again. Eve watched her silently. Audrey looked back at Eve, her lips slightly upturned. "Sometimes I feel like Miss Eve is like an elder to me." Eve feigned surprise. "Do I look very old?" "No, of course not." Miss Eve looked only 18 or 19, but Miss Eve had worked and lived alone in Backland for over 10 years, so Audrey speculated that Eve should be in her 20s or 30s. "It's just a feeling." "Haha." Eve chuckled twice, then lowered her voice and whispered, "From a normal person's perspective, someone my age should already be in the ground." Audrey blinked, gazing curiously at Eve. "Can Beyonders, upon reaching a certain height, extend their lifespan and maintain their appearance?" "How amazing," Audrey praised in her heart. Miss Eve was indeed a powerful Beyonder, and a very, very seasoned one at that. Audrey's beautiful eyes shone brightly as she watched the young woman opposite her, seemingly wanting to peer through the illusion to see her true self. The waiter silently walked to the dining table with a tray, placing the ordered meals on the table. "Thank you." Eve turned and smiled at the waiter, then picked up the corkscrew, uncorked the red wine, and poured a glass for Audrey and herself. Audrey's good upbringing did not allow her to speak with food in her mouth, so the conversation ended amidst the mellow aroma of the red wine. After the meal, Eve, carrying the packed Dixie grilled fish, left the restaurant with Audrey. Rui Rui, Eve waved to the black furball by the roadside. Rui Rui's ears twitched, and she slowly raised her head, her brown eyes looking at Eve. She lazily shook her body and walked towards her. Eve half-crouched, tucked the Dixie grilled fish into the collar around Rui Rui's neck, and casually rubbed her small head. "This is your lunch, Miss Eve," Audrey exclaimed, immediately turning to look around, only to find that the people nearby seemed not to have noticed this unusual scene. There was nothing out of the ordinary. "They," Audrey murmured, "can't see." "Ha, Eve stood up and chuckled twice. "It's just a small illusion. Miss Audrey will be able to achieve the same effect in the future." "Really?" Audrey first asked in surprise, then reacted and said in astonishment, "Miss Eve knows my." Audrey did not continue, unsure if Miss Eve's illusion covered herself, worried about being exposed. Eve shook her head. "Many pathways can achieve such effects, the only difference is sooner or later." "So that's how it is. If that's the case, doesn't Miss Eve know a lot of knowledge about pathways?" Audrey's eyes lit up as she pondered in her heart, then does Miss Eve have the subsequent formula for spectator? Rui Rui looked down at the silver badge, then rubbed her head against Eve's hand. "I'm sorry, Susie," Audrey said, rubbing Susie's head, "I didn't bring you lunch. I'll make it up to you when we get home." Eve picked up Rui Rui, turned to Audrey, and asked, "Miss Audrey, do you want to explore a bit longer?" Audrey nodded. She had only been in Biome for a short while and didn't want to go back yet. She then looked down at Susie again, smiling as she said, "Susie, if you're hungry, you can tell me." "Woof." Susie barked happily. Then, "Miss Audrey, would you like me, an amateur guide, to continue showing you around?" Eve gently stroked the soft fur on the black cat's back, a slight smile on her lips. "I don't know any famous attractions, but I do have some unique places I can recommend to Miss Audrey." Audrey's eyes lit up, and she immediately nodded. She was more interested in those unique places than in tourist attractions. Audrey followed Eve with anticipation, walking through one street after another, her skirt fluttering as she left her footprints in this generous city. Here, Eve stopped and nodded slightly, gesturing for Audrey to look at the tavern in front of them. "There's a secret gathering here tomorrow, a place where wild beyonders trade. If Miss Audrey wishes, she can come with me tomorrow." "Of course, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's gathering," Audrey said, surprised, her eyes full of joy and anticipation as she looked at Eve, seemingly hoping she would reveal more such locations. Biome has quite a few such underground gatherings, but apart from this one, there's no news of any others. Eve chuckled softly, explaining, "To prevent detection by official beyonders, these underground gatherings are held irregularly, and they all have specific methods for relaying messages. If Miss Audrey doesn't mind the trouble, I can take you to see them." "How could I mind?" Audrey said, in an exceptionally cheerful mood. "Thank you, Miss Eve." Eve led Audrey through the city, traversing one street and dock after another, their figures appearing and disappearing until the blazing sun's rays receded, and they hastily departed. At night, a soft crimson veil passed through the window, enveloping the girl's body. Eve sat half reclining on the bed, her hair flowing like water down her back, her sea blue eyes calm as she quietly read a letter. "Dear Eve, congratulations on finding your brother. I can go to Backland anytime, everything is up to you." Eve looked at the short, non-standard letter in front of her, a slight smile on her lips. She folded it and placed it in the bedside cabinet, her gaze then turning towards Tingen. The reception room of Blackthorn Security Company was badly damaged. There were broken cracks in the walls, all the furniture was displaced and overturned, and there were glass shards on the floor. Klein slumped on the ground, clutching the wound on his chest, wincing in pain. When Mei Gao Oc arrived at Blackthorn Security Company, there were only 3 Nighthawks, him, Leonard, and Fry. The resistance was very difficult. Klein's chest was directly cut by Mei Gao Oc's bone scythe, and Fry's head hit the wall and was bleeding continuously. Only Leonard was in a relatively better state, but his eyes were constantly bleeding. Perhaps because Lin'er had the true creator's divinity within him, Megao did not attack him, and Lin'er's condition was actually the best. Klein allowed Dana to help him up, then turned to look at Megao lying on the ground, feeling a pang of pity. Megao was clad in tattered clothes, with flesh missing from her face and body, especially her face, where half of it was reduced to bone. Her entire skin was charred, and her arms were connected not to hands but to two stark white bone scythes. She lay on the ground with her eyes tightly closed, seemingly dead. Klein felt a twinge of pity and was about to avert his gaze when he suddenly saw Megao's belly, like that of a woman 8 months pregnant, shrivel before his eyes. Immediately after, the girl's charred black skin began to peel off, revealing new, fair skin, and the missing flesh also grew back. The bone scythes slowly disappeared, replaced by the young woman's hands. Ah! Megao groaned, struggling to open her eyes, and looked around in confusion. All this happened so fast that the Nighthawks hadn't even reacted before Megao had already resurrected. Sesama immediately held his holy sword in front of him, watching her vigilantly. Under the gaze of many eyes, Megao frowned, clutching her head, seemingly in pain. After 2 seconds, she hastily looked up at the Nighthawks around her. I'm sorry, Megao apologized repeatedly, her voice tinged with a sob. I don't know what happened, I've been in a daze these past few days, feeling like I wasn't myself. I'm sorry, I never meant to hurt any of you. Sesama frowned as she looked at Megao. She seemed to have regained her clarity. Out of caution, Sesama did not lower his holy sword. Dunn looked at the girl crying on the floor, pondered for 2 seconds, and threw a coat over to her. Megao then realized that her clothes were torn, and immediately picked up the coat and put it on. Thank you, the girl said timidly. How much do you remember now? How did you resurrect? Dunn asked tentatively. I remember everything, from being pregnant until now, I remember everything, Megao sobbed. Resurrection. I don't know, I didn't die. Megao saw the shocked expressions of the people around her, and she nervously clutched the coat on her body, her voice trembling slightly. I shouldn't have died, but I was indeed on the verge of death. When I was lying on the ground, I was conscious, but, I wasn't breathing, I thought I was going to die then. And then, Dunn immediately asked, taking a deep breath. Don't be nervous, speak slowly. Megao nodded, clutching the coat on her body tightly. Then I felt a warm current from my abdomen flow to all parts of my body, and then I woke up. I can feel it, but I don't know why. Megao touched her abdomen. The child should be gone. Sesama and Dunn exchanged glances. After a moment of hesitation, Sesama slowly lowered his sword and said to Megao, we understand, miss. We will handle you appropriately. My name is Sesama Crest. Dunn Smith. Dunn extended his hand, wanting to help Megao up. Megao hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in Dunn's. She opened her mouth and said, Megao. Eve looked at the ugly doll surrounded by black flames in her hand, and chuckled softly. The black flames gradually engulfed the doll, leaving not even a speck of ash. Good child, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Chapter 75 Familiarity. The young girl lowered her eyes, continuing to enjoy the drama unfolding. The people from the Holy Cathedral will arrive tomorrow morning, Dunn said. Miss Megao and Mr. Lin'er, please go to the Holy Cathedral together for examination. All right, Megao said softly. She glanced at Lin'er, feeling a surge of resentment. Although Megao wasn't sure exactly what had happened, she could guess that she had probably been harmed by her fiancé. She gritted her teeth inwardly but dared not act rashly, carefully asking, Sir, may I know what exactly happened? Of course, Dunn nodded. You were involved, so of course you can. Dunn briefly summarized the events and told Megao. After hearing this, Megao felt a mix of fear and anger. She glared fiercely at Lin'er. If she could, she would pick up a stick right now and hit Linnerwusi over the head. This damned scoundrel actually used her for an evil ritual and even made her pregnant with a spawn of evil god. I'll send a telegram. This matter needs to be reported to the Holy Cathedral. Dun turned to leave. Wait, Mei Gao Oc suddenly called out. She glanced at the people around her, hesitated for a moment, and pulled her coat tighter, saying, I have some strange knowledge in my head, and I've gained some magical abilities. What knowledge and abilities? Sesama asked. I don't know why I know these things. Mei Gao Oc pressed her lips together and slowly began. My physical fitness has greatly improved, and I know many characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures. I can also use spirit vision. In other words, Dana mused for a moment. Miss Mei Gao Oc unknowingly became a Beander of the corpse collector pathway. Sesama frowned, looking at Mei Gao Oc, then at Linnerwusi. Linnerwusi's face immediately turned very ugly. This indicated that there was another person involved, someone he didn't know, and his plan had been exploited by that fellow. Klein and Leonard exchanged glances. Indeed, it must be that, spectator. I understand. Dunn took a deep breath. As the captain of the Tingen Nighthawks team for so many years, this was the first time he had such a headache. High-sequence-related cases were coming one after another. After tonight, he estimated that the scale of the Tingen Nighthawks team would likely be expanded. I will report it truthfully to the Holy Cathedral. Dunn turned and left. Sesama scanned the area, his gaze settling on Klein. Klein, Sesama asked, why do you have such a powerful Beander weapon? I bought it at an underground Beander gathering. Klein had already prepared his explanation and said unhurriedly, Leonard can testify. Yes, Leonard immediately nodded. I even lent him the gold pounds to buy the weapon. Sesama nodded. To be able to produce such a Beander weapon, the wild Beander who sold it might be a Sequence 5 powerhouse, or even a demigod. You should pay attention in the future but do not clash with that wild Beander. Klein nodded, a sigh of relief escaping his heart. Meow. A cat's meow suddenly sounded. Klein immediately turned his head towards the source, seeing only a pair of brown eyes and a white cotton collar in the crimson moonlight. Rue. The black cat looked around, then jumped out the window. Sesama quickly ran forward 2 steps. In the night, the black cat was already gone. He scanned the area. 3 red potions lay quietly in the corner. Inside a house with a red chimney, a white quill floated above a book, writing. ... It's a pity, Mei Gao Oc failed, the spawn of evil god died, and Ince Zangwill's foolish plan failed. Ince Zangwill stared intently at the passage, grabbing the floating quill. Veins bulged on his hand, the force seeming to snap the pen, his heart filled with unwillingness. He took a deep breath, gripping the quill tightly, and wrote heavily on the paper, No, one failure is nothing. Ince Zangwill will get what he wants. A powerful spirit world creature passed by and saw Ince Zangwill. He felt great sympathy and interest in Ince Zangwill, so he decided to help him, helping him leave Tingen. As the last word was written, a transparent tentacle extended, wrapped around Ince Zangwill, and pulled him into the spirit world. The young girl watched Ince Zangwill as he traversed the spirit world, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the soft bed beneath her. You'd better give me some surprises soon, Ince Zangwill. Klein, why the sudden emergency overtime? Benson put down his newspaper and glanced at Klein, who had just woken up, asking. Today was Sunday, and Benson and Melissa were both home. Isn't it too tiring to come back so late? Last night, Klein left them a note saying he would be working overtime and returning late, but he only came home this morning. A batch of artifacts suddenly had a problem, requiring an emergency inspection, Klein said. It's not tiring, such things are rare, and besides, the weekly pay is so high. That's good, then, Benson pointed to the dining table. We saved you breakfast, but it's lunch now. Klein chuckled twice, quickly ate breakfast, grabbed his keys, and prepared to leave. He planned to go to the library to find some information about Hornassus Peak. Among the books he got from Old Sister, there was a geography book. Klein had roughly glanced at it, and it contained some information about Hornassus Peak, so he intended to find more information about Hornassus Peak from the 5th epoch to study. Although Old Sister said he should preferably wait until he became a demigod before exploring Hornassus Peak, since it was already listed in the library, looking at it shouldn't be a problem. Now, learning more would prepare him for future explorations. Klein took a carriage to the library and happened to see a familiar figure at the entrance. Mr. Azek, Klein greeted with a smile, "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Klein." The bronze-skinned middle-aged man was startled when he saw Klein, then smiled and said. Klein looked at the thick stack of books in Azek's hand. "Mr. Azek, do you have a new research topic?" "No, it's still the same, just with some new ideas." Azek shook his head. "Are you looking for information related to ancient artifacts? I can help you." Azek remembered that Klein's job was with a security company whose mission was to find, collect, and protect ancient artifacts. Klein thought for a moment and didn't deny it. "I want to find information about Hornassus Peak." Hornassus Peak, Azek recalled, then said, "There isn't much research on Hornassus Peak, but Cohen once studied Hornassus Peak. You can ask him." After speaking, Azek looked at Klein as if he wanted to say something, his eyes a bit strange. Klein looked at Azek with some confusion and asked, "What's wrong, Mr. Azek?" Azek hesitated for a moment and said, "Actually, I know a little about divination. Your fate has some inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies? Have you encountered any coincidences?" Azek asked. "Coincidences?" Klein's heart skipped a beat, and his gaze towards Azek suddenly became strange. "Mr. Azek, is he a Beander? And a very powerful Beander?" "Mr. Azek," Klein looked at Azek seriously, his eyes containing a hint of inquiry, "what inconsistencies are there in my fate?" "I'm sorry, I can only see that there are inconsistencies in your fate." Azek tightened the books in his arms and said with downcast eyes, "But I can't see the specifics." "Perhaps you need a professional seer." "No, a seer wouldn't be able to see it either." As a seer himself, Klein silently retorted in his heart. "Hey, Klein." A familiar voice sounded from behind. Klein turned around to see Miss Eve standing in the distance, waving at him. She lifted her skirt and jogged over to Klein's side. When Azek saw Miss Eve, a sudden sense of familiarity surged through him. He felt an unusual emotion rising in his heart, a strange desire to get closer to the young girl in front of him. Azek frowned, his eyes complex as he looked at Miss Eve. "Hello," Azek said, "I am Azek Egger, Klein's teacher." "Hello," Miss Eve smiled and nodded. This wasn't the first time she had met him in Azek's reincarnation. "Mr. Azek, my name is Eve. Did we used to know each other?" Azek hesitated for a moment, but finally asked the question. This was the first time in many years that he had encountered someone who might be related to his lost memories. "I'm sorry, miss, but I'm genuinely asking. I've lost many memories. All my memories before I became a history teacher are lost, but seeing you gives me a sense of familiarity." Klein was stunned for a moment, not expecting that Mr. Azek had amnesia. He had never heard him mention it, but such things were indeed not easily brought up. Old Sister and Mr. Azek know each other. Klein looked at the two, pondering. Then Mr. Azek might be even more powerful than I guessed. Miss Eve's sea blue eyes gazed at the man in front of her and she said directly, "I know many people, perhaps you are one of them." If it were before, Miss Eve would definitely tease him. It was very interesting to tease a god's child who had lost his humanity and gained it back. After knowing Azek's situation, Miss Eve had traveled thousands of miles to watch. However, even the most interesting game eventually gets boring. So, in this reincarnation, Miss Eve knew that Azek was in Tingen but never actively sought him out. Is that so? Azek felt a little disappointed, but also a sense of relief. He was curious about his past, but at the same time, he was afraid that exploring his past would bring unpredictable consequences. "I'm sorry, it seems I cannot help Mr. Azek with this matter," Miss Eve said. "Mr. Azek, have you ever thought about searching for your past?" "You don't need to apologize," Azek said. He looked at the young girl in front of him, the sense of familiarity always lingering. "I have thought about searching for my past, but..." He paused, hesitated for a moment, then said, I feel that my past is not simple, and I'm afraid that searching for it will bring me unpredictable dangers. It's not convenient to discuss details here. If you are available, you can come to my office. Isaac observed his surroundings, then said. Miss Eve pondered for a moment, then said, It's my honor, but I don't have time right now. Klein and I are going to a gathering. I'm very sorry to decline your kind offer, Mr. Isaac, but we will definitely visit when we have time. A hint of confusion flashed in Klein's eyes, but he immediately reined it in. It's all right, Isaac shook his head. I've delayed Miss Eve. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.